Zebulon Board of Commissioners work session for 3/17/2022. Call meeting to order. It's for approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda. Second.
We have a second. All in favor? Motion passes. We have guests.
Yes, Mayor, we do. We have Ms. Bianca Gilliam, and she's a student. I believe you've got the bio or script in front of you if you'd like to introduce her.
Yes. Ms. Bianca Gilliam lives here in Zebulon. She's a sophomore at Wake Early College. This week she's on spring break and she chooses to spend her time with us, learning about local government. In the past few years, she's spent time with the police, fire, parks, rec, and administration. Bianca was born in the Dominican Republic and moved to North Carolina when she was 11. She is the middle of 7 children. Her father, Victor, is a former owner of Palmieri Foods and has been in the Zebulon community for nearly 20 years. So, welcome, Ms. Gilliam.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the board. Today we have 5 topics for you, 7 presentations. The first topic is going to be a revisit on the relocation of Fire Station number 1. The second will be a continuation of our presentations on the pre-budget, what we're calling the community needs assessment. You'll specifically receive presentations from legal, planning, and public works. We will then continue the conversation on the utility allocation policy, and we'll bring you some information on options for a future board of adjustment, as well as follow up on the bond referendum. So let me introduce our first topic and our first speaker on the fire EMS station, the relocation of Fire Station number 1. This presentation is a follow-up to February's work session. The board will receive a detailed review of the process followed for selecting the site for relocating Fire Station number 1 to a more centralized location. The board will also receive details of Wake County's offer to participate in the design and construction of the fire station and their proposal to fund and retain an emergency medical service station in Zebulon by co-locating at the same site. And with that, I will introduce Fire Chief Chris Berry.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Board of Commissioners. As Joe mentioned, I'm going to follow up from where we talked about last month about the fire EMS station and kind of bring you, do a little bit of review and in some cases bring you up to speed and how we got to where we were. I want to follow up some of the questions that were asked last month and try to answer those and fill in some of the blanks we may have left from last month. So we showed this map. This is a map from 2019 where we identified sites back then. The map of sites did not necessarily represent sites that were available. They were sites that we identified as possible locations. I think that's an important part. We didn't necessarily, to make this map, so to speak, we didn't necessarily make contact with people and verify that it was available. We just identified potential locations to evaluate. From that document, we developed some criteria. Acreage, we were looking for a site that was somewhere between 2.5 and 3 acres that is sufficient to hold the building, the associated parking, including some training areas and that kind of thing. We were looking for a site that was acceptable for EMS co-location, and that was primarily along the NC 96 corridor, which provided access to the US 64, 264, and the north-south corridor via Arundel Avenue or NC 96. We were looking for a location in relation to our target to continue with a single fire station model. We have to locate the fire station in a very close proximity to that target. When we deviate outside of that target, it begins to leave areas exposed. So that we're kind of narrowed down in the area that we could choose. So we looked at that as one of the criteria as well. Beyond that, the last area of criteria we developed was roadway and operational capabilities. Did the site require us to do extra to be able to utilize it as a fire station. And I'll give you examples of each one of these criteria as we go through this tonight, this afternoon. For each one of these 4 criteria, we gave them 3 categories. It wasn't very scientific, but we tried to use that same criteria for everybody. Is it acceptable? If it is, we gave it the green shading, so to speak. Is it marginal or does it need improvement? Maybe it's okay, but there's some issues that would need to be addressed. We color-coded that yellow. And if it was just simply unacceptable, we color-coded that red. And again, I'll give you some examples of those as we go through. And from there, you saw a document that looked a lot like this. And that's kind of what we presented to you last month. And I want to kind of take just a few minutes to explain how we got there, because I think that's a good, to go straight to that. Maybe there's a couple of steps of the ladder that you may want to see. So we'll take just a second and go through how we got there. So to back up to our map of properties that we identified back in 2019, our first criteria to look at was acreage. I mentioned that 2.5 to 3 acre window we were looking for. As an example, I've provided 2 properties. The one on the left is a property on Pierce's Road, just north of the Waffle House, that we looked at fairly early on. And you can see, although it's the design with the fire station, there's a basic fire station design similar to what we think we would be looking towards. And we just simply see, does it fit? And in the acreage suitability on the one on the left, you'll see that is acceptable. We gave that would be an example of a green or an acceptable site. The one on the right is a site just south of the East Regional Center and the Public Library. This site meets our acreage, but you can see the site is very narrow and deep. And no matter how you turn that fire station, it just simply won't fit. So that's an example of a not acceptable site. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit more insight into how we looked at acreage. So we go back to our master map, so to speak, and we apply that criteria. Then we begin to X out properties that don't meet those criteria that we established. All of those with the red X would not be acceptable due to their acreage and size. From there, we continue to move on with our sites. The next was EMS co-location. And as I mentioned to you, that 96 corridor is key because it gives them north-south, and it also gives them access via the interchange with US 64 264, so they've got east-west travel lanes as well. So, for example, if we located in the Shepherd School Road area and wanted to access the US 64 264 corridor, as is outlined with the little arrow there, obviously you can't do that because there's not an interchange there. To not being an interchange there makes those properties not acceptable, and EMS would choose not to co-locate with us. So that was, early on, that was identified as a priority to try to have a project that EMS would continue to co-locate with us. When we applied that to the properties that hadn't already been deemed unacceptable, property L got the red X, so to speak, because it was located on that Shepherd School Road corridor. So from there, we take those sites, and as you can see, we continue to step through this. Our next one was location. And the circle indicates that target area that we're looking for. And we evaluate the remaining properties. And if you can tell by the map, there's about 4 or 5 properties that have not already been deemed not acceptable at this point. And we begin to use that same criteria. If you go just a little bit out of the circle, we consider that marginal. It's not what we were exactly looking for, but is one property over? Is it okay? Is another property? So we considered it marginal. If they were further away, we considered it unacceptable. So looking at that, the 2 that you can see, A and B, are within the circle, so they are acceptable. And then the other 2, we rated those as marginal because they were a little bit too far north, potentially able to use, but they really were pushing the boundaries of what we were looking for to be able to continue with the single station coverage. So again, we continue with our assessment of the properties and then the roadway. And the best way to describe roadway, I'm going to carry us back to that Pierce's Road property. Due to the arrangement of the property and the traffic conditions up and down Pierce's Road, apparatus could exit on the Pierce's Road. Traffic congestion, definitely a big factor. If you can imagine The traffic congestion is normally associated with Pierce's Road, and then you introduce an emergency vehicle, plus 5,000 times a year, the congestion that could cause the delays. But getting back into the building, we would have to complete the section of the street behind so that the apparatus could enter from the back. This is not an area where it's really conducive like we do on Vance Street today, where the apparatus just pulls across the street and backs up into the building. You take a busy street like Pierce's Road and pull a fire truck right crossways, and people get out and start backing the truck back in. It's not really the situation that any of us would want. So this is a good example of something that, could we live with it? Sure, we could live with it. But does it create a tougher situation to make the site work? It definitely does. So this is an example of a site that we marked as a yellow site when it comes from roadway. So we evaluated all the sites that were remaining for the roadway access. That did not affect our site A and B, but it did continue or reiterate that the Pierce's Road site was a yellow site at best. So we went through those, and that kind of gets us to where we ended, and we had many discussions with the board about that that A site, and that's kind of what got our conversation started about the GSK site as one of our potential sites. Well, from there, the board asked us to look for additional sites. Are there other places out there that we could potentially locate the fire station? And this map is about maybe a couple of years later. And what we saw was some of the sites we had earmarked in years past were no longer available. For example, you may have noticed on some of those earlier slides, the Popeyes site was one of the sites we considered. Well, at this point, they were building the Popeyes. So that's no longer a viable site. So sites were beginning to drop off, and then we added some sites as well. So the additional sites come up, and you see those designated by the M, N, O, P, and Q. Sometimes the sites we would find, sometimes elected officials would come to us and say, have you looked at this site? Sometimes people would call us and say, hey, we've heard you're looking for a fire station. Here's a potential site. So you see those reflected in O, M, N, P, and Q there. From those sites, we ran them through the exact same evaluation we did all the other sites. We started with Acreage. When we applied that 2.5 to 3 acre minimum, and we looked at the way the fire station could sit, that immediately eliminated O and N as an example. I showed you N in the earlier example of why that wouldn't work. O didn't meet. The O is the property right across the street from where we're at tonight. That left M, P, and Q. When we looked at the next criteria, which was EMS co-location, all of those sites were accessible through Shepherd School Road. M was a little bit unique that it stretched all the way from Arundel to Shepherd School, but on the Arundel side, the property is very, very narrow, so most likely any entrance and access would be on the Shepherd School Road side. When we applied the EMS co-location gauge to those sites, none of those were accessible, and they received the red X as well. So that series, if you will, is what got us to the map that you saw last month, and hopefully maybe it makes even a little bit more sense how we looked at each one of those sites and applied those, and that left us with Site A and Site B, the only two sites that were green across the board. The other site, the next closest site, was the Site C, which had 3 green of the 4 criteria, but it was definitely too small for acreage. So that is how we ended up with the last 2 sites, and the board spent quite a bit of work looking at the GSK property. So when the board last month asked what would be our plan B, so our plan B would be that other all green site, if you will. So I want to take just a few minutes to kind of just show you how that site, those 2 sites compare to each other, and allow you to kind of guide us in where we would go in that direction. You've got 2 sites in front of you, the Site A and the Site B. This slide just kind of captures those elements that you saw from the big chart. Goes into a little bit more detail, and I'll hit it, and then we'll get a little bit deeper into it as we go. The acreage, when you look at each one of them, one is almost 11 acres, one is just over 3.5. Improvements needed. There are a couple of improvements needed for each site. Most of these are dictated to us through the UDO, and it deals with the road frontage in front of the properties, or in the case of the TARP property in the rear, where there are unimproved streets that would need to be improved as is prescribed in the UDO. And both include some type of signaling at the intersection. There is not a signal at Judd and Arundel, so that would require installation of a signal. At the Dogwood, what we're referring to as the TARP property, there is an existing stoplight there, so we would take use of that stoplight and just add the functionality that allows the emergency service vehicles to stop traffic when they approach. They're both within the target area, and EMS is accepted. They're good with either location for a co-location site. So I titled this slide the required Judd Street transportation improvements. However, you could apply some of this to either site, but just as an example, the slide on the left talks about the road frontage improvements that would be necessary. So on Judd Street, for example, we would need to improve the frontage of the street in front of the property, very much like what is going on East Gannon. And what you see here is an example I used of the East Gannon property, where they just improved what was on their side in front of the property, and we would be required to do the same thing on Judd Street. On the right is a fire signal light at the intersection. This is what we've included. It is not a full traffic control stoplight, but a means to stop traffic long enough for emergency vehicles to pass through. We could opt to do more, but this is what would be required to make the fire station functional and to keep fire apparatus and ambulances moving smoothly through the intersection. So let's kind of break down these two sites and the different components that we have done and would need to do on these two make an attempt at an apples to apples comparison. Site acquisition on the municipal complex, that property was purchased in August of last year by the board. So that one we've taken care of through our work with this project and through the board's actions. Roadway improvement, that would be that portion, that 50% of the Judd Street, half of Judd Street right there in front of the property. You'll see there that is estimated at $600,000 to make that roadway improvement. Intersection control, putting some type of flashing light similar to the picture I just showed you to stop traffic when the apparatus and the ambulances are coming through, $120,000. Conduct a preliminary site plan, that has been done. I say preliminary because we don't have the final building design, so we can't do a final design, but we have seen that a building like we're looking for would fit on the property, so it was deemed to be feasible. A soil survey was complete as part of the land transaction, and it was found that the soil is compatible with a fire station to be constructed, should we decide to do that. Phase 1 environmental survey was also complete as part of the land transaction, and it came back clear. The good thing about a clear Phase 1 environmental survey is it does not require a Phase 2 survey, so that was found to not be necessary. So you look at a total cost estimate of $720,000 to basically get that site ready for construction. Just to give you some idea where we would be if we looked at the TARP property. So that property is currently listed for $3 million. Again, that is what it is listed for. There's been no discussions with anyone to find out what it could be obtained for, but that is, for our purposes of discussion, that is what it is listed for on the market today. On the roadway improvement, the UDO would require Jones Street to be extended behind the property. The longest side of the property is the back property that fronts where Jones Street should go. That has a estimated cost of $830,000 to do the half of the street, so to speak, across the rear of the property. Intersection control is much less because it's an existing intersection, so all we would do is just adding that functionality to be able to make the lights turn red so vehicles could come through. We have not done a preliminary site plan, although the acreage appears to be sufficient. We haven't had a designer try to figure that out. That could be done if desired. A soil survey needs to be done to make sure that the soils are compatible. This would be a key part of this project because one of the concerns we heard from facility and design and construction when we looked at the site in, if you recall, which was right beside the regional center, was that they had a lot of really bad soils in that area for construction. So we would want to make sure that the soils are suitable. There used to be a residence on that property, so you could assume, but we don't know until we get in there and do those soil borings. And in the phase 1 environmental survey, we put in there the estimated cost of the soil survey at $35,000, which includes a phase 1 environmental survey as well, but that would need to be conducted. Again, it was a residence before, but it would investigate any prior uses of the property and any potential hazards associated with it. And then that would tell us if we needed the phase 2 environmental survey, which typically comes in at about $25,000. So if we were to have to consider what I would call the worst case scenario, that's about $3.9 million on the Tart property. Also, there was a couple of questions asked last month. I want to follow up, get you answers to those. I believe Commissioner Laux asked at least one of these. Regards to EMS share as part of the construction cost, but would they share the ongoing costs, the utility cost and what have you? And the answer is yes, that EMS will share part of the ongoing costs for the building. We're lucky in one respect that the county is in a very, very similar process with the town of Fuquay right now. So they're hammering out some of these details, but that is part of the deal that they do share those ongoing costs of the building. And then the second question was, how many calls or responses could we expect to see coming out of this facility? So what I did for 2021 was look at how many unit responses, and what I mean by that, not only do we have a call, but sometimes multiple vehicles go. So Commissioner Laux, Mr. Laux, if I understood your question, it's just a matter of interruptions to the traffic flow. So if we have 3 fire trucks coming, that could essentially be 3 interruptions if they don't all leave at the same time. So looking at 2021, there were 2,435 unit responses, and EMS had 2,805 unit responses that came from the Zebulon-based ambulance, which is 5,240 unit responses in 2021. I would expect that number to be anywhere from 5 to 20% higher in 2022. I will note that not all of those responses come from the facility. Sometimes fire trucks are already out when they get a call, so they don't respond from the station. That happens a lot with EMS, but that does give you a frame of reference, almost a worst case scenario kind of thing. And then lastly, for what I'll talk about tonight before I answer any questions or begin the discussion, we talked about the memorandum of understanding, should the board decide to proceed. We talked about that, and I wanted just to highlight some of the things that we talked about in case there were any questions. The memorandum of understanding that we presented last month is written for the Judge Street property, but it could be altered for any other potential site. We would just need to make those changes, but the material parts of it would be pretty much the same regardless of the site. This is out of Section A, and the reason I highlight this this is the section that says that any work beyond this design agreement would require both the Wake County Board of Commissioners and this board to approve and appropriate funding. So this doesn't give any permission for any construction, for any further work outside of what this scope allows of this document without approvals of both of those governing boards. The second thing that I point out to you from that memorandum of understanding was the scope. What is included in this memorandum of understanding? It's site planning, architectural programming, floor plans, building elevations, and renderings. Just trying to figure out what are we building and how would it look on the property that we're considering. It doesn't go into any technical drawings, heating and air or plumbing or anything like that. Section E talks about how we divide the cost of this design work. This section talks about it's 80% fire, 20% EMS, which is based on the anticipated base usage. That's the way we can share all the costs. But the part that I want to be sure to point out to you, when you see 80% fire, that does not necessarily mean it's 80% town of Zebulon. The county and the town would split that 80%. So it follows the model where the town ends up paying about 50% of, technically speaking, 51% of the design cost associated with this, 20% by EMS, and the remaining 29% is paid by the county fire tax. That is consistent with the conversations regarding funding of the project, and that what I just outlined is outlined within the document. So it is very well spelled out. I just wanted to point out that for you as you see it in the document. And then this one refers to Section F, refers to the fact that the building would be owned by the town of Zebulon. That's important to stipulate in a building that has multiple partners and multiple funding sources. And then, let's see, I think I've got just a couple more related to the MOU. One more is the community engagement piece. That was a part that this board identified as a priority. And it does include community engagement to obtain feedback on anticipated use of the building and the site. So the whole idea is wherever the building is located, we want our community to be able to be involved in what the building looks like, to make sure it fits in with the neighborhood that it's in, to make sure it's a property that our public is happy with, and it works for what they would like to see in their neighborhood. So from there, hopefully I've given you some things hopefully I've answered the questions that came up last month. We stand, as a staff, we stand ready. If you're ready to proceed with a memorandum of understanding, we're ready to do that. If you have other avenues you would like us to pursue, we're obviously ready to do that as well. So we stand ready to, probably a good part to take questions or comments. So.
I have some questions.
Sure.
So, about how much time is spent in each unit response occupying the first initial getting out onto the road? Is it about a minute for the truck to actually pull out onto the road? I'm sure it's probably less, but is a minute fair?
Yeah. I would say, if I was going to just give it a time on average, I would say probably about 15 seconds to navigate an intersection. That's probably worst case scenario. If the light is green or the road is passable, and that's exactly what we're proposing is some type of access control, then there would be no delay as the apparatus would just go straight through the intersection because they would have the green light and all the other lights would be red.
Okay, so if we go with your 15-second estimate, then if we use 20% increase, that's going to be 6,288 calls, but let's just round it down to 6,000 calls. That means that at 15 seconds per call, that's about 25 hours a year that we're going to see an interruption. Or would it probably be more like 50 hours because we have to go out and then turn back in?
Yeah, I would say that the 25-hour estimate would be like a maximum.
Okay.
Because there's so many times that there would be no delay associated at all. So.
Okay, all right. And then my second question relates to the funding itself. I know that in order for us to retain ownership, we have to be the majority stakeholder, of course. Is there a difference between the money that we're getting from Wake County Fire and Wake County EMS? Are those two differently designated organizations? Because if they are, can we ask them to contribute more of a percentage because we will still be the majority stakeholder at the end of the day because those are two separate?
So I will answer to the best of my knowledge. So there's two different funding sources coming from the same organization.
It's the same organization.
Yeah,
Okay, that answers it, I think.
They're both Wake County, but one is the Wake County General Fund and one is the Wake County Fire Service Tax Fund. So I think it's coming from one organization, being Wake County, but they're using it, they're receiving it from two funding sources.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Chief, two questions. First, on page 7 of the PowerPoint, you show on the acreage suitability that the B site is not acceptable. Yet on page 20 of the presentation, you show that there's been no site study or site plan even conducted. So how can we say it won't fit, and yet we say we haven't studied it? In other words, it looks like you've already got a design of a fire department station figured out, but we don't have that finalized yet. So isn't it kind of hard to say it won't fit on another piece of property?
So which one were you referring to that said it won't fit? I'm sorry?
If you look at page 7,
Yes, sir.
you show site B is not acceptable based upon a drawing of a fire station. And then on page 20, under the TARC property, you say there has been no preliminary site plan or study done. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out how it doesn't fit on one page, yet on another page, we say we've not really done a site plan.
So on slide 7, we're talking about Lot N, the property beside the East Regional Center.
Yeah, you show that the site or the station layout fits the Judd Street property, and then on the right-hand side, you show it does not fit on the TARC property. And the point I'm making...
The left-hand side's Pierce's.
Yeah, the one on the left side is the Pierce's Road property.
Okay, I
And the
stand
one on the
corrected, yeah, on Pierce's Road, but then you show it does not fit on the TARC property.
And the one on the right is the property behind the TARC property.
It's not the top property.
It's a small lot beside the regional center. I don't know if I
Okay,
can-
it's not the TARC property, it's the one right next to the TARC property.
That's right, yes, sir.
Okay,
You're exact, because if you can see the edge right there where I'm pointing, that's the TARC property. So this is the property right behind it.
okay.
Does that make more sense?
Yeah, stand corrected. And then question number 2, did we determine whether Wake County would contribute towards a land purchase or
Yeah, we
owning the
have-
building?
Right, we have not explored any possibility of them. From the beginning, we were purchasing the land. It seemed cleaner. It seemed if we purchased the land, then there was no question of joint ownership of the property. But to your answer, we have not asked.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if they would consider helping us buy property and splitting it 51-49 and we still retain ownership.
Sure.
That may be worth at least asking.
That is something that we could certainly find out.
And I'd also be interested in knowing what kind of flexibility the price on the TARP property has.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for me? I've got on my to-do list to explore the flexibility on the TARP property price related to the listing price and to explore Wake County's possibility of contributing to land purchase, procurement.
Good presentation.
Thank you
sir.
so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so repeating what we said at the last work session, per the general statutes, the manager, as the budget officer, is responsible for recommending an annual budget and a capital program to the Board of Commissioners. And we've started a series of community needs assessment presentations that are a preparation for the board for their upcoming FY23 operating and capital budget scheduled to be presented on May 2nd. So this is just a continuation of those series of presentations. Before I introduce the individual presentations, just give a brief outline. So the presentations you'll hear today are from Legal, Planning, and Public Works. As always, we'll connect these presentations to the goals and the focus areas of your strategic plan. Today's presentations, how they relate to those focus areas, the vibrant downtown. Planning is going to be tied most to the vibrant downtown. Their presentation, you're going to hear about full membership into the Main Street program. Under the growing smart focus area, the community assessment piece, all three presentations will touch upon this. The growing nature, the complexity, the diversity that your town has experienced. The presentations of all three departments will touch on this. And then under the small town life, again, planning will touch this most specifically, not only in their budget presentation and talking about how to stay current with the current workload, but also when they talk to you about their utility allocation plan and their bonus points about how to integrate and connect neighbors with their surrounding neighborhoods. And so with that, I'll introduce Eric Vernon, your town attorney, to go over the legal community assessment.
Thank you, Joe. Members of the board, mayor, members of the public, it's my honor to present the legal assessment for the town of Zebulon. This is going to be a historical reference as well as a current assessment of our needs. And what we'll talk about today are duties and responsibilities of the town attorney, the scope of duties, rules of professional conduct, statutes, analysis and evolution of legal services. This is the meat of the presentation about how growth is driving the legal assessment. We'll give you a historical review by year because I think it's going to be very interesting for you to see how we got here. And then there's legal services analysis and summary. We've got legal resources and projects. I want you to be aware of those. And then finally, we'll suggest a budget. So here we go into the duties. The scope of duties includes the duty of the town attorney to prosecute and defend all lawsuits, to render advisory opinions, to attend the meetings, to prepare and review deeds, contracts, bonds, other legal documents, draft and review proposed ordinances, and here's the catch-all, to perform such other legal services as the board may require. The rules of professional conduct are very important to an attorney. There's a duty of loyalty, confidentiality, and communication to your client. When it's an individual client, it's pretty simple. You owe the duty to that person. When it's a corporate client or an organization, then you owe that duty to the organization's duly authorized constituents. That means I owe my duty of loyalty, confidentiality, and communication to the board. And the way I review it and the way that everybody at Wyrick Robbins does is we represent the citizens of the town of Zebulon, and the citizens speak through their duly elected officials. It's statutory. 168-173 says that the town shall appoint a town attorney. The Charter 5.3 says the town shall appoint a town attorney. Ultimately, though, the board gets to decide how legal services are provided. The analysis and evolution, we have growth-driven, historical, legal services analysis, and summary. And so the growth-driven is what we're going to start off. The scope of legal services directly relates to population growth. Population drives the demand for services. The demand for services comes out in two ways. You got to have more of what the town is already doing, and there are new services to meet citizen demand. Legal services have evolved since I started here in my 14th year now, from an as-needed outside counsel to a more integrated legal department. Here we go with the pie charts. I love these things, they're really great, and I have a pointer. Look at that. So if you'll begin in this first pie chart at clockwise, going from, well, clockwise, you'll see the light blue is the meeting category. If you'll see the green, that's the growth-driven category. Then the orange is intergovernmental services. Then the gray is departmental services. And then the yellow is other non-recurring. These categories seem to sum up the great bulk of the work that we have. There may be an argument that non-recurring is maybe growth-driven. So it wasn't as clean a line as I would like between non-recurring and growth-driven, but it is very valid and it's consistent throughout these slides you're about to see. So if you look at this year, which was July 1st, 16 through 6/30/2017, I call that fiscal year 2017, the total amount of legal services was $215,093, and it was divided up into meetings, 29,000, 14%, growth-driven, almost 100,000, or 46%, intergovernmental, 53,000, about 25%, departmental services, 24,000, 11%, other non-recurring, almost 8,000. Now we move into the next year, you'll notice there was a substantial drop in the amount of legal services. And I'm going to tell you why in 2017 that was such a surprise. And the reason was in 2017 we had a review of the Mudcats lease. It was the first time in 15 years the Mudcats lease had been reviewed in a comprehensive manner. It was in conjunction with the sale of the Mudcats from Mr. Bryant to the Milwaukee Brewers Ball Club. That alone accounted for about $40,000. So we went from $215,000 in fiscal year 2017 to $177,000 in 2018. So that was the reason for that drop. I would call the $177,000 to be normal for that time in the year. You'll see that meetings continued to be about 15%, 26,000. Growth-driven, almost 100,000 again. Intergovernmental, 10,000. Departmental services, 21, very consistent with the prior year. And then we had a boost in non-recurring that year. Next, 2019 fiscal year, pretty much more of the same. 185,000, slightly higher than the year before, but not much. Growth-driven was still the great bulk of the services. Other non-recurring in 2019 was 43,000. That was a big deal. And that was driven primarily by the beginning of the North Arundel Traffic Improvement Project on North Arundel Street, as well as an emphasis on minimum housing citations and enforcement of our minimum housing code. That was a significant element in non-recurring. Then we get on to 2020. Significant jump in 2020 from 185,000 to 236,000. That was meetings, increased slightly, growth-driven, still close to 90,000 and a very substantial component. Intergovernmental, we had a relatively stable amount. Departmental services actually reduced, and not only in dollar amount, but also as a percentage of the total. And then finally, other non-recurring, 83,000 and other non-recurring. That was a substantial increase in that year, primarily because of several projects that carried over from the year before or came online, such as the Glaxo acquisition, disputes with Barrington and Autumn Lakes, North Arundel, and Arundel Vance sewer line matters. There was also an initiative to lease a town commons that occurred in 2020. Now we have 2021. Again, they have the meetings, which have increased. My theory on why meetings have increased is because we have a relatively new board, we have a UDO, we have a new mayor, we have a change in some of the policies that were pursued, and so I just think there's more demand for meetings, more topics to cover, and more support that's needed. Growth-driven, again, in excess of $100,000, 48%. Intergovernmental, 21,000. Departmental services, 22,000, 10%. Very consistent with past. Other non-recurring, another 14%. This last pie chart represents the first 6 months of fiscal year 2022, and you'll see that growth-driven is the great bulk of our fees to date on that. This is a fascinating slide here to me, but it may not be as much fun for you just because it's kind of busy. But what it does is it's color-coded according to those 5 categories I gave you, and it shows how the expenses and the percentages evolved from year to year. The one thing I'll bring your attention to is category number Five, well, yeah, I guess I numbered these incorrectly. I apologize for that. But what we've got here is the department-driven. That's the departmental services. Departmental services have remained remarkably consistent, even going down over time, which I find interesting, and I attribute that to the overall professionalism of the board, of the staff. The staff has become more used to their roles. They have a UDO that is decidedly user-friendly, and I think that that is the reason that departmental services is actually reduced as a percentage of total expenditures as well as total dollars. This year-to-year bar graph comparison gives you a sense of the categories and how they have developed over time. You'll see that the meetings have increased slightly. As I said, the reason being, I believe, new board, new policies, more topics to cover. Just there's more things going on. The growth-driven could also be called dispute-driven, because these are issues that come up whenever you try to enforce your ordinances, as well as growth-related services that are demanded. For example, the Barrington and Autumn Lakes disputes are in here. The North Arundel street improvements, traffic improvements are also in the growth-driven category. The intergovernmental services, I talked to you about 2017 where we had the Mudcats lease. Otherwise, this pops along, but it's just unpredictable. It's hard to say what kind of intergovernmental issues are going to come up. Occasionally, it'll be a FEMA issue related to Liver River. Occasionally, it'll be the sailback of water and sewer capacity and the real estate that goes along with it. As you can see, departmental services is next, very consistent. And then other non-recurring, very unpredictable. They're one-off types of things, so it's hard to say when they will occur or if they'll ever happen again. So next, we go into our year-to-year analysis. As I said, 2017, first review of the Mudcats lease in 15 years. Planning growth related. I wanted to emphasize planning growth because keep your eye on planning growth as we go through these years. In 2017, total legal fees related to planning is $33,000. Planning departments are typically the highest consumers of legal services in departmental services. In 2018, we had the Barrington and Autumn Lakes appeals. This was an unwilling developer and a dispute that arose that the town was involved with. Even if there is a dispute that does not claim that the town did something wrong, the town must be involved by producing a record and defending the interests of the town. Now, that was abstract. What I mean specifically is when it came to the Barrington subdivision, a third party, a private party appealed, not us, and Barrington didn't appeal from the decision. A third party did. But when that happens, the town has to be involved and has to discharge its statutory obligations to provide a record and defend its actions. Here's another thing that came up in 2018. The minimum housing priority came on. That was a relatively new priority. This is a result of a generational deterioration of housing stock in that year. Notice, planning department growth related, 19,000, down from 33. 2019, North Arundel Improvement Project, beginning a major traffic initiative. Minimum housing, especially the Mayo case, which was particularly problematic, where the town actually had to demolish the property and undertook judicial recognition of the right to do so, so we had to go into court. Planning department related, 34,000. Now we went 33 in 17, 19 in 2018, and now we bumped up to 34,000, which I note is the high mark there. 2020, several growth-related projects that we talked about before, $61,000 more or less, and those highlights. Planning department, 21,000, 33% decrease from 2019. 2021, growth-related projects carried over from the prior years, plus we had the East Wake EMS project and the Zebulon Historic District project, 95,000 in those select projects. Planning department growth, 15,000, represents a 46% decrease from 2019. Non-recurring includes the sale of the Green Place property, that was $13,700. 2022, that's this last 6 months. Growth-related projects we carried over from prior years, including the Autumn Lakes fee dispute, Old Town Hall property line dispute, North Arundel condemnations. This was a huge growth-related expense in the first 6 months. I do not expect this to happen in the next 6 months. And the final planning department growth-related, $348, 99% decrease from 2019. I can't emphasize how remarkable that is and the tribute that that pays to the professionalism of the staff and the way that they do their jobs. They are pretty good at knowing the law of their department. And that's not just the planning department, that's all the departments. It's just particularly noticeable in planning. Now we have a summary for you. Municipal boards are operating in an increasingly complex and risky environment. You know, I don't have to tell you that. You know it. Legal services are no longer provided by a solo outside counsel. They've been replaced by a legal department with resources from a broad range of legal practice areas. There is no one attorney that can represent the modern, growing town in North Carolina. It just can't be done. Cost of departmental services has remained consistent while decreasing as a percentage of the total services. Growth and growth-related legal services, including disputes, are the most significant driver of legal costs. Total costs anywhere between $86,000 and $110,000. Percentage of total costs between 36% and 55%. So that's really what's driving legal costs. Unpredictable events drive costs. That's those non-recurring, one-time events that I mentioned. And the town should understand that somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 per year are going to be spent on things that we hadn't counted on. You walk in on Monday with your to-do list that's 10 items long. Well, by the Monday afternoon rolls around, sometimes that list is 12 items long. And that's what happens with these unpredictable events. Sometimes they're positive. They're not always negative. The Glaxo acquisition, for example, that was a windfall to the town of approximately $1 million in fair market value over what we paid for it. The Wake EMS property donation, that was approximately $450,000 worth of property that we didn't have before they gave it to us. That cost money to integrate, but it was well worth it. Legal services are not exclusively a cost. They can result in economic benefits as well. For example, outside of this time frame, but in addition to the $1 million benefit, and that's just a round number, it might even be more. For Glaxo, the attorneys provided a conversion of performance bonds along North Arundel Avenue from performance bonds, which were insurance policies, into cash. In other words, we went to all of the folks that had performance bonds on North Arundel. We said, we're getting ready to change North Arundel. We would hate for you guys to spend the money to do the road improvements that we told you you had to do, only for us to tear it up and put the new stuff in. So why don't you convert your performance bonds to cash and let the town have the cash instead, which is exactly what they did to the tune of over $100,000. And that was driven by legal staff. Enforcing a letter of credit. We had I'm trying not to be pejorative. We had a developer that wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. So we called the letter of credit that he had for $88,000. And as a result of that, we were able to negotiate a mutually agreeable resolution of the problem. I can assure you that if we didn't have that developer's $88,000, it would not have gone the way that it did. Legal resources and projects, I've touched on some of this stuff, so I'm not going to dwell too much on these things. But it's a repeat of the fact that the demand for legal services has grown in parallel with the increasing complexity of the issues that face the town. Wyrick Robbins has committed, my firm has committed to me to give me a team of legal experts that I'm able to bring to the table for different things. Like I said, no one attorney can handle it all. I'm no exception. I've been doing this for 31 years as a municipal lawyer, and I need more help now than I ever did before. So here's my expertise, 31 years, 14th year with the town. My expertise is in board governance, procedures, conflict of interest issues, land use, finance, and public-private ventures. Sam Slater, we couldn't manage without Sam. He's our litigator, he's our quasi-judicial hearing guy, he's our appeals to the Board of Adjustment. Just to give you an idea of Sam's effectiveness, he has a 100% success record. He's never lost. And he resolves disputes before they ever get to court because he's such an effective negotiator. He represents the town so well that he convinces the other side, we need to resolve this by consent rather than go into court about it. So that reduces the risk for the town, not only the risk of losing, but also the risk of incurring additional costs. Charles Archie, one of the finest real estate practitioners you'll ever have. He was the primary attorney for the Glaxo acquisition. Hannah Combs, Hannah is a brilliant young lady. She touches just about everything we do. She's a constitutional law expert, and she was primarily responsible for developing our objections to the National Historic District, which required going into the National Historic Register, the Code of Federal Regulations, the state regulations regarding historic properties. She went and did all that research and coordinated it so we could have a good and consistent and effective response. By the way, you'll remember that when we objected, the National Parks Office, which was responsible for that, agreed with our objections and forced the SHPO to come back and start over. She also does policy development, ordinance drafting, and enforcement analysis. We like to have rules that can be enforced, and that's what one of the things Hannah does. Dan Palmieri, excellent employment lawyer and benefits lawyer. He was primarily responsible for assisting the town in a recent personnel investigation. Grady Shields, environmental law expert. He was involved in the Wake EMS project and is available anytime we need him, and he's done more than just Wake EMS. Kevin Stanfield, general commercial litigation, but more importantly, we have a resource that is an expert in eminent domain. If we ever have to condemn property, Kevin knows how to do it. He's extremely efficient. Charles George is an insurance and construction law and litigation expert. Hopefully, we will not have to do that, but to the extent we grow, to the extent we build something, to the extent we get into contracts and folks default on those contracts, Charles is the man you want litigating that for you. Devin White, this may be something that the town hadn't really thought about, but Devin is a trademark and trade name filing and protection expert. If we wanted to file trademark protection for our town logos, for our departmental logos, it's surprising how reasonably priced that can be. And if you really want to protect those logos, the way to do it is through trademark and trade name filings. The key projects, we have the following list of projects. Board support, as you know, we provide all of the support that the board needs on a variety of matters, including conflicts of interest, personnel policy matters, board agenda prep, the quasi-judicial and litigation matters. That's Sam's world, and just naming Dixon Fleet Services for one, but there have been several items that Sam has resolved through code enforcement and Board of Adjustment hearings, as well as quasi-judicial. We've managed the town through a minimum housing issue with Mayo that included judicial sale order, so we had to go into court to that, and he took care of it. Right now, very important project that has to do with a fee in lieu that Autumn Lakes and Barrington have to pay. Sam is leading that along with Mike Clark, Chris Ray from the staff. Real estate development, very important part. If you didn't know it, real estate is a huge part of municipal government. You're acquiring parks, you're acquiring easements, you're selling excess property, you're doing a lot of things. And some of these things are, for example, the East Wake EMS that we already talked about, the Green Pace Rose sale that brought $175,000 to the bottom line, encroachment agreements to activate downtown space where old buildings just happen to be in the right-of-way or on the public works. We have to take care of those things and make sure that citizens are protected, that their right of public access is protected. Community development's a big deal, and it's going to get bigger. This has to do with, right now, primarily to do with the acquisition of easements, road improvements, negotiations with DOT and private property owners, as well as the recent Shepherd School Road easements for the road improvements there. Intergovernmental projects, we talked about the Mudcats lease that was together with Wake County. We also were involved with the City of Raleigh in the sale back of water and sewer. There was a very significant real estate component to that sale back. that involved an expansion of Little River Park. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. But at one time, the city of Raleigh owned all of that area adjacent to Little River Park. But when we sold back the water and sewer rights, we were able to negotiate a return of a significant amount of that acreage. Town attorneys have been instrumental in the National Historic District project. Town attorney's been working with county to structure the leases you voted on at the last meeting, the amendment. And now we have the legal department budget. Here's the money part of it, and I'll make this short and sweet. It's based on historic averages as well as the expectations that the legal services will continue to rise. And our budget request for the coming year is $275,000. This represents an increase from the prior fiscal year, and it's also based on our experience of an increase in the first 6 months of the current fiscal year. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a couple just in regards to some of the history that you were talking about. When you talk about the fees that we paid in our contract negotiation with the Mudcats, we paid 20% of that, right? And then Wake County paid 80% of those fees?
No, ma'am. Wake County paid 100% of their attorney fees, and the town paid 100% of its attorney's fees.
Okay.
It just so happened that there was significant issues that affected the town of Zebulon a lot more than it affected the county.
Okay.
So in protecting the interests of the town, we had to dig in pretty significantly on that.
Okay. And then in regards to 2020, the personnel matters that we addressed, were those placed under non-recurring?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
sure was. And I think you'll see on the bar graph that that's pretty clearly illustrated in 2020.
I just wanted to make sure, because you didn't mention it, you mentioned a couple other
But
things.
you know,
so I just wanted to
there's
make
a
sure.
lot of things that in non-recurring that could be growth-driven. That's probably not one of them. That's probably correct in non-recurring. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St.
I'm
Patrick's
available.
Day.
If you have any questions, if you need anything at all.
Any other questions from
Thank
the
you.
board? Thank you.
Thanks.
Mayor, we're going to have to hold just a little bit. If you'll let Mike go ahead and present, we're not quite ready.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Planning?
I apologize, I didn't catch all of what she had said. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Today we're going to provide an overview of what the planning department currently does, our current structure, how it relates to the assessments of what services we're able to provide within the community, and looking forward of what our needs going to be not only for this next fiscal year, but also in the future years. To provide a basic overview, the planning department actually consists of many different subjects. The first of which is current planning. This is where developers will submit applications, rezoning, site plans. It's working with real-time regulations, existing land conditions, with the anticipation of beginning construction within 24 to 36 months of when their the initial submittal is. These are the projects that come before you for either special use permit or a rezoning request, and these are also the requests that go through our technical review committee for review. The next category is long-range planning. The most significant of the efforts was last year with the completion of our comprehensive land use plan and our transportation plan. While there's big topic items that happen every 5 to 10 years with the replacement of these plans, long-range planning is always an ongoing thing. Looking at ways to better modify our existing plans and documents to not only represent the needs of the community, but also adapt to changing conditions. The next category is permitting. This is the most visual from the citizens' perspective. They see the new houses going up, they see new restaurants and buildings being constructed, and this is what typically results in the most response from those driving by. It also allows for the growth that we have in the community, as this is the point when property owners and new citizens are able to move into these new homes. It's also a significant driver for tax increases, and in commercial situation, also sales tax increases. The next category is the flip side of permitting, and that's code enforcement. Unfortunately, with growing situations, we do need to have a full-time code enforcement officer. They're the ones who address the citizen concerns as they relate to private property issues when it comes to junk and debris, inoperable vehicles. They're also the ones that handle the minimum housing cases. As the attorney mentioned, as we grow and age, some of the housing stock also ages. And if a property owner is renting that property out and is not willing to invest in the upkeep of that property, that's where minimum housing can really step in to make sure that we're having safe, sustainable, and clean living environments for all the citizens of Zebulon. GIS service is our next category. A lot of these positions are grouped into within one, or a lot of these services are grouped into one position, and our planner 2 oversees GIS right now. Previously, we had a standalone individual that took care of this, but moving forward, we do have one individual that does planning as well as GIS services. That really relates to making sure that we're providing up-to-date information. It's a communications conduit for the public, not only with creating our zoning maps, but also things like this with our interactive development map. This provides real-time data for the citizens of Zebulon, for the development community, and other interested parties which want to know what is going on in town, not only what is under construction, but what is being proposed. Next, we have our downtown associate community, which is a division of North Carolina Main Street. As you're aware, we have a contract service with a staff member to offer 20 hours a week. This program is the precursor program, which allows for us to establish the foundations of an organization, gather community support, and roll into a full North Carolina Main Street program. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that'll look like in the future later on in the presentation. Finally, we have economic development. As an example, currently our economic development efforts is committee-based with myself, our downtown associate community coordinator, as well as our parks and recreation director. Because we don't have a current full-time economic development specialist, it takes all three of us working together to realize things such as McClellan bagpipes. That began as a phone call and then a conversation amongst the committee members, realizing that we can really step up to best serve this property owner's or this business owner's needs and bring one of 3 bagpipe manufacturing organizations within the United States to downtown Zebulon. Altogether, this is what makes up the Zebulon Planning Department. Our vision is really focused on providing exceptional customer service, improving efficiencies where we can find the ability to do so, while maintaining clean and safe environments, not only for our staff, but also the citizens and business owners within the town, and making sure that we're able to provide competent and timely reviews for the development community. That is really important because one of the biggest factors that developers and companies use to determine whether or not they're going to do business with the community is what is the turnaround time, and are they going to have open levels of communication with staff? As many of you heard yesterday with the ribbon cutting, that particular business, one of the reasons for locating here was the relationship that they had already established with the staff. So let's look at the past trends of growth and how this is going to interact. As you're aware, East Wake County has grown pretty substantially over the past years. In fact, between 1980 and 1990, the majority of the communities within Wake County, with the exception of Cary and Raleigh, really had comparable populations. Garner was the outlier in there. However, over the next 30 years, there was substantial growth, primarily because of other economic development catalysts, interests moving to the Triangle. However, that growth really was amplified with the town of Apex and the town of Wake Forest. Today, the town of Apex has approximately 70,000 people living within its corporate limits. The amazing thing is we're projected to have that same level of growth within the next 30 years, which is substantial. Realistically, we're going to have to make some really significant changes in operations in order to hit that threshold. However, we are expected to hit 18,000 within the next couple of years, specifically by 2028, which is just a couple of years down the road. As you're aware, with a lot of the departments, they're focused primarily on population. Well, with planning, we have to take into consideration two different components. Population is a significant aspect, especially when it comes to code enforcement. As more folks move here, we need to make sure that we're able to maintain that clean, safe, friendly environment for all residents. So with increased growth requires increased code enforcement capabilities. However, we also have to take in consideration development pressure. That is where that growth percentage really comes into play. Over the past 3 years, we've had an annual average of 12% growth. That's substantial, even in Wake County. That is a lot of new site plans coming in. That's a lot of new residential plans being reviewed by our planning technician and our agreement with Wake County building inspectors. However, you could have a population of 30,000, but if you're not growing, you don't have that development pressure. However, the town of Zebulon currently has both. So to look at our current capabilities, going back to 2007, I really want to highlight on a couple of these. Certificate of occupancy is issued. In 2017, we only issued 74 occupancies for the entire year. Fast forwarding to calendar year 2021, we issued almost 300. There was a little decline because of COVID and folks were not getting out to purchase as many homes. Additionally, supply shortages were a significant issue as a lot of these builders were unable to even get the products there to build. Finally, the lot count for a lot of these developers was a limitation because they used up all of their platted lots. So there was a delay between when these phases were coming in from when they were completing the other phase because they were constructing and selling a lot faster than they anticipated. Code enforcement, we went from 93 total code enforcement cases to actually in excess of 300 in 2021. One of the things that we really did differently, though, is we no longer relied on just written communication, notices of violation. When possible, our code enforcement official would go out and have conversations with property owners and with business owners to help educate them that, yeah, we do have regulations to help keep a safe and clean town. That improved efficiency. It also improved response and cooperation from these business owners and these property owners. Rezonings, we had no rezoning requests in 2017, and over the past couple of years it has fluctuated. Last year we only had 3. In 2020, that number was pretty high because there was 4 of them that were actually cleanup text from the adoption of the Unified Development Ordinance. Finally, the planning staff, in 2017 we had 4, and in 2021 we had 6 full-time staff and then 1 contract employee, and that was our downtown associate community coordinator. Well, we've increased staffing. It still does not meet the need for the community. Our current structure looks like this. The planning director oversees the operations of our downtown associate community coordinator, as well as the assistant planning director. The assistant planning director, however, oversees the planner 2, planner 1, planning technician, as well as code enforcement official. This allows for the planning director to work collaboratively with the community, focus on things such as economic development, working with business owners, and focusing on long-range planning, where the assistant planning director is really able to focus on current planning needs in the office here. So moving forward, how does this work? In order to continue forward and maintain the levels of service that we have right now, we're going to need to really focus on investment in staff. That is going to be paramount because when you get a new staff member in the planning department, it typically takes 12 to 18 months for somebody who's like mid-career level to fully understand the local regulations. The Unified Development Ordinance, the Comprehensive Land Use Plan, the Transportation Plan, all of those documents are location and community specific. So even if they come in and they have a master's degree in urban and regional planning and 10 years experience, you can still calculate that 12 to 18 month time for them to really be able to competently go through and do a full review of a site plan. It's even more so with the younger, less experienced staff. For a planner one, you can expect it to take 2 years for them to come up to speed of what the local regulations are. We're also going to be looking to hire an economic development specialist. As I noted, that currently we have a structure that is a committee-based structure, where it's myself, the Parks and Recreation Director, and our Downtown Associate Community Coordinator. The three of us, we do work very well together. However, none of us have the specialty needed. As you heard at the mini retreats in Apex, there is a lot of communication and working with property owners, business owners, that we just don't have the available resources or background to be able to do effectively. So we'll be looking to hire a community economic development specialist. Finally, which is a part of economic development, is to join the Main Street program. In terms of investing in staff, while this is listed in this budget year, it's actually not going to be an expenditure for this budget year. It'll be in 24 and 25 and potentially in the future. It'd create a progression or a career ladder, starting with planning technician, moving up to senior planning technician based on the acquisition of certification, specifically the zoning official certification with North Carolina. Moving up to planner one, this is where a person might come in if they have a degree in urban and regional planning, an undergrad degree. And then as they get their CZO and other credentials, be able to move up to a planner two, and then a planner three once they obtain their AICP. And eventually obtaining a senior planner status. A senior planner status not only will be a project manager for a lot of these projects coming in, but they'll also be supervising some of the younger staff, the planner ones, the planning technicians. However, not everybody's going to be going through to become a planner. We also have code enforcement in our division. Right now, we just have one position. However, we want to make sure that we have opportunities for advancement. So that individual will be able to move up to a senior code enforcement officer, and then potentially, while it's not listed at the career ladder, once we do have additional code enforcement staff, a chief code enforcement officer. And that too will be based on years of experience and accreditations. The economic development specialist would really specialize or focus on business retention and expansion. As you're aware, we had this program and contracts with outside organizations in the past. However, really bringing it in allows for us to work collaboratively with our department, our economic development specialist, as well as the business community to help companies such as Nameko not only stay in the community, but also expand within the community. They'll work collaboratively and actually oversee or supervise the Downtown Associate Community Program or Main Street Program if we do move into that. Those two positions need to work collaboratively and in concert with each other. As you know, one of the goals in the strategic plan is to grow smart. This is an example of growing smart because we're making sure that we have two roles that work in tandem with each other. It also helps with the downtown vibrancy. Wake County Economic Development sends requests for information to each of the different communities. These provide a checklist of items of what companies are looking for to potentially relocate to a region. Part of that is understanding what the inventory is. As noted at the mini retreat, we really need to know your sites and all the details, what your utility capacities are, what the traffic counts are, what the values are. An economic development specialist will make sure that they have that full comprehensive checklist and be able to respond in a timely fashion to these requests for information from White County Economic Development. Additionally, they'll be able to go and recruit additional businesses to come to Zebulon. We still have several lots vacant in the Triangle East Business Park. This could be an opportunity for the economic development specialist to work collaboratively with the property owners and bring additional industry into the community, which then translates to jobs, tax base, as well as personal property tax for industry. Finally, it would be with the creation of an economic strategic plan. This plan would be a real long-term perspective, similar to what the comprehensive land use plan is, but specifically for economic development. As noted at the mini retreat, that project with Fujifilm Dynasite was 20 years in the making. The commissioners at that time decided we're going to set aside land for this particular use. This is something that that plan would accommodate, and this is something that the economic development specialist would be able to work and ramp up to. Ultimately, with salary, benefits, and costs associated, we're anticipating this position being approximately $104,000. Next, we'll move into North Carolina Main Street. Right now, we're classified as a downtown associate community, so we're not a full Main Street community, which means we don't get some of the same opportunities that the full Main Street community has. Typically, this takes 3 years to go through this program. However, because of the efforts between the Economic Development Committee as well as our current Downtown Associate Community Coordinator, we're able to realize some advances, and they're now saying that we'll be able to enter in sometime this summer, which would cut that time, that 3 years, in half. Some of the benefits of being in a Main Street community, as an example, is the design resources. If a property owner has an idea that they want to do something with their property, it allows for us to coordinate with the design services at NC State to actually create three-dimensional renderings, which then translate into marketing documents to help bring folks in. It also allows for additional collaboration with other communities, really realizing best practices, as well as learning from some of the best and the brightest in the industry, not only within North Carolina, but across the country. This would start with the organization of a board. It could take 3 different forms, either a fully independent organization separate from the municipality, a hybrid model where it could be a 501c3 or a 501c4, and that would work collaboratively with the town, where the town would provide the staffing, and the board could be either appointed by the Board of Commissioners or as their initial, and then maybe self-appointment later on. There's several different ways to work that dynamic. The third is have it fully internal. The model that seems to work best within the state is that hybrid model, where it's a separate 501c3, especially if it comes down to acquisition and sale of land. They realize additional resources or additional eases, I should say, of that land transfer, where municipal governments have to go through several other steps through bid processes. We would also have to have a full-time person running this organization. That's one of the requirements. Being that we're under 10,000 at the moment, we could either have 2 individuals, both part-time, with one designated as the director and another one as an assistant, or one 40-hour-a-week individual. We do have confirmation that we can maintain it as a contract agreement, which is what a couple of the other communities within North Carolina do. And that would actually be our only real additional cost from where we're at right now. As I noted, we've realized a lot of our efforts, which then saves us time to join the full program. Finally, the revitalization efforts that we've already been putting in place, such as the alley activation space, the wayfinding, the street trees, the switching to LED lights from the previous lights for energy savings. All of those things are things that the North Carolina Main Street community recognizes as contributions in downtown. Our facade improvement grant, our streetscape grant, and working with the local business owners are also reasons that we're able to advance much faster than a lot of the other communities. So to be able to realize this, to be a full Main Street community, it would be a $62,000 full-time contract to continue our services, but expand them out to a 40-hour work week. We would maintain our existing travel and training budgets that were put in place to really help encourage citizens to attend conferences, as well as bring folks from the North Carolina Main Street into town, where we only have to pay for their travel, for their mileage and lodging. All of the actual time it would be covered with North Carolina Main Street. Additionally, we continue our investment in downtown. We continue the alley activation, the facade improvement grants, and the other programs that we have moving forward. So to summarize this, we'd be looking at adding an economic development specialist for a total of $104,000, and that includes salary, costs, benefits, and all that. Advance into the North Carolina Main Street program, and that would be a contract for $62,000. Which for a total would be $166,000, but also noting that in 2024, we'd be adjusting the salaries as we create and progress up that career ladder for staff that has met those experience and credential requirements. So let's look long-term for a moment. Town of 18,000, how would we accommodate that? Realistically, we'd be proposing to split the department into 4 divisions. This is not unheard of, not only within planning departments, but also different departments within the town. We would have our planning, which would really specialize in current and long-range planning on the far left, and we would have to add 2 individuals to have a total staffing of 5. Code enforcement, we're going to need an additional code enforcement officer if we do have 18,000 population. That would be a separate division. One of the things that we've discussed in the past and is still on our radar is at some point we want to bring building services in-house. Right now we have a contract agreement with Wake County Building Department where we do all the permit intaking and the processing. Their reviewers review the plans for compliance with the North Carolina Building Code, and then the inspectors go out to the site to make sure that they're building in accordance with those standards. At some point, we want to bring these in to make sure that the culture and the character and the customer service-oriented nature of our department translates over into the building and code enforcement. And so with that, we'll be looking for a chief code enforcement officer, or a chief building inspector, which will be a general building inspector, a trades inspector, and then a permit technician to really help behind the scenes with the intake of the permits and the processing. Finally, with the economic development division, this would be the economic development specialist would be that new position, and that would add into our existing efforts with our downtown associate community and our Main Street community. And with that, I am available if you have any questions.
Just with that one, the 62,000, the 62,000, that considered one person or 2 people, just to make sure I understand correctly for that, the Main Street program?
That is one individual, and being that's a contract staff person, it does not result in any benefits, insurance, retirement, or any of those details.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we want to continue?
We're good. We're ready.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. This time we're going to recess for 45 minutes and convene back. Reconvene. Public Works.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor, members of the board. Well, that's going into our second hour. I feel like I ought to do what one of my previous predecessors, Mr. Johnson, didn't tell a joke, but I'm not good enough to deliver it. So I'm not going to try it. I'm not going to make Joe back there squirm because I don't even have to look back here now. I know he's squirming a little bit. Chris is going to tell the joke.
It's St. Patrick's Day. We will also accept limericks.
All right. But I do have a couple of lines in there that maybe draw your attention as we move through, just to keep it a little interesting and all. Because I know public works is everyone's favorite topic besides mine. So with that said, we'll get started. Clearly, you know, public works handles a wide variety of duties and responsibilities that maintain the quality of life for and that is enjoyed by our citizens. We provide development review services, infrastructure inspection, to emergency response, to collecting yard waste and leaves. So we do a wide variety of services that reach out and touch the citizens of Zebulon. In looking at the capacity assessment, it has really changed a lot over the last 20 years of my service, and probably mostly in the last 5 years. The geographic growth that we have had has just been phenomenal. The volume growth for the development and stuff has been substantial. You know, Zebulon's growth is being driven by the developments. We now have 12 new subdivisions that are actively under construction or in the design review process. You know, development growth is just exploding. For example, at your April meeting, I hope to bring to you a request to accept roads for 2 other subdivisions for additional 1.72 miles. That's 5% of our existing roadway stock. That's almost amazing. It occurred overnight. So we are growing significantly fast. You know, many years that I, worked for the town, that there'd be no growth, no or minor growth in streets and stuff. To see something that quick coming 1 quarter, that's significant. So as we look further into the public works capacity to handle that growth, we'll look to look in deeper to what that geographic growth and volume growth is. On the geographic growth, you've probably seen this map. We've used Public Works, Police Department and Fire have used it a little bit in their presentations, and we're going to carry forward with it. You know, in 2012, our geographic square miles was approximately 3.25, and now we're up to 5.2. That's a 58% growth in just the landmass area that we're covering and serving. You know, what used to be a short trip across town to Stratford Drive to pick up trash or to make a roadway repair, now it's significantly longer when we got to travel to Weaver's Pond and Pierce's Landing. Aside from the time that it takes to travel there, many times we need to take equipment with us to go make that repair in the roadway and stuff. That equipment now takes much longer to get there. A trip to Pierce's Landing now may take as much as 30 minutes. When we're making that trip, we're driving a backhoe on the road. Unfortunately, that backhoe drives only about 15 miles an hour. It can, during peak times of traffic, cause backups. What scares us the most about it is, like our growing community, it gets impatient. We see people passing double yellow lines, passing multiple cars, and it's creating a safety hazard. So now we have to change how we do business. We now have to looking to put our backhoes and our payloaders up on trailers. That requires us to have CDL licenses for our drivers with a Class A. It also requires additional time just to now mount the backhoe on the tractor and secure it down. Just to go do the same job we used to do on Stratford Drive, now to go to Golden Plum, it is taking us significantly longer to accomplish just because of the traffic and the distance. One area that we're seeing significant amount of volume growth is our bulky waste. Since 2016, we've seen a 106% increase in the amount of tonnage that we have. That's directly correlated to the number of houses and the people we serve. It was not uncommon 5 years ago that I would sign out on Friday to pick up bulky waste. The operator would have it completed by lunch, and then in the afternoon, they could sweep for several hours. Well, now it's taking all day, and on some really busy days when people do a lot of spring cleaning and cleaning out of their house, it takes 2 operators to complete the same task. So that's having a real impact on our ability to do things like street sweeping. If you look at the chart below here, street sweeping, you see, is on a 10-year decline. The decreases in number of hours has dropped almost 62%. We feel like sweeping is important to keep the pollution out of our waterways. We do it to collect the trash and the yard waste and especially what's called the P10 pollution. That's all the tiny little bits of exhaust, brake dust, oil, and other particles that wash right into our streams. I know you're aware of it, but many people don't realize that the stormwater system does not have a treatment system. So anything that we don't collect through our sweeping process goes straight into the collection system and ultimately into our creeks and streams. So sweeping is a vital and critical part to complying with our federal and state permit for stormwater. A lot of people will notice and have noticed, and we get calls about, when's the last time you swept our neighborhoods? And we clearly tell them we try to meet our goals of sweeping residential streets once a month. But unfortunately, our time is taken away with doing other tasks. Our sweeping is important to keep our community vibrant as we want to attract new families and new business to Zebulon. Here's probably the biggest growth piece that we've seen over the many years is to take a look back in history where we're at. In 2012, we had 19.3 miles of street. In 2012, we had sidewalks about 8.4 miles. Storm drainage pipe was 21.7 miles. A typical typical street of 19 miles would run from basically Zebulon to Walnut Creek. That same sidewalk we mentioned would reach Wendell Falls. That same stormwater pipe would reach the city of Raleigh. Now you see significant increases across the board. Now we have 30 miles of street. That same roadway goes to the town of Cary. That used to be to Walnut Creek. That sidewalk that went to Wendell Falls is now reaching the Beltline and the eastern edge of Raleigh. The street miles, the pipe miles is now 21.7. Now that reaches the Raleigh Convention Center. We went from residents in 2012 to 1,740 residential households to now 28. So whether it's a 55% increase in roads, 77% increase in sidewalk maintenance, or 126% in stormwater pipe, or the number of residents we got to stop, our workload is increasing. But unfortunately, the number of operators that we have has not increased. So over the years, we've we have accomplished this to maintain our service levels is through efficiency, through equipment purchase and all, like the knuckle boom and the leaf truck. But we no longer can keep up with these growth in capacities. First capacity assessment that we're struggling to meet is staffing. Our first capacity is that we no longer have enough staff to meet the service levels of what we could in 2011. One of our biggest challenges is that we only have one shift. It's the same few people who, no matter how long it takes now to accomplish the job, to complete all our tasks. Give you an example. In January, we were hit with 3 snowstorms, 3 weekends in a row. Those same few people that worked those 40 hours plus a week were the same ones that came in and prepped for the storms on the weekends and cleared the roads and cleared the sidewalks. And then came back in on Monday. In 26 days in the month of January, between January 10th and February 4th, they had 3 days off. Guys, that's a lot of work. And all these guys wanted to provide service to our community and our growing community. One of the other areas that the lack of staffing hurts is our on-call rotation. We need 2 people to be on call instead of 1 because a lot of the tasks that we are performing, whether it's lifting a grate that you see above to get a basketball out of a storm drain, it requires 2 people, or just because of the work zone we got to set up for safety. So we're struggling to get people to come back on call. One of the things we'd like to do is we also have what's called a facilities on call for our 80,000 square feet of buildings. Right now, there's 2 people covering it. We do have 1 vacancy, but we'd like to get that to where there's 4 people on that rotation. So not 1 person or 2 people are constantly having to cover for fire alarms, lift station alarms, power outages, or other issues that we have to respond to. So we need to build that bench to have more people to cover those responsibilities. One way that we're looking to try to enhance our capacity and to solve that solution is in this year's budget, we're asking for 3 additional crew to help us with the growth in additional streets, stormwater, right-of-way, to help to protect the town's investment in these assets. We need these crews to maintain our streets to the standards Zebulon has come to expect over the many years, and to meet that 55% increase in roadways. Interesting stat, we have roughly 75% of our stormwater system in the older part of towns is greater than 50 years old. There's some areas that the stormwater infrastructure is greater than 100 years old. Additional people will allow us to identify and repair problems underground before they become exposed to above grounds. Like a recent issue we had to deal with, a sinkhole on West Lee Street easement for storm drainage. If we can be out there proactively investigating these, cleaning these lines, cameraing these lines to catch these problems and failures before they happen, before we get calls from residents. Another area is we'd like to improve our right-of-way maintenance. Currently, we're investing over $200,000 a year in streetlights, but many of the streetlights along the right-of-way in these older neighborhoods prevent the light from reaching the ground. They're creating safety issues for pedestrians, increasing opportunities for crime. The lack of light makes it more difficult for our patrol staff and our police department to see suspicious activities. These limbs also scrape and damage the town's large trucks, from our knuckle boom trucks to our sweeper, and occasionally our fire trucks. So we want to get out and proactively trim these back so that the light can reach the sidewalks, the front yards, and improve the overall safety of our neighborhoods. To do that, we feel like that 3 positions would cost us $175,000. That is for 1 equipment operator, equipment operator 1, equipment operator 2, and a crew leader, which is our typical crew. We feel like this investment is a small investment based on the number of assets that we have of approximately $37 million.
Chris, does this currently capture the equipment operator 1 that you have posted now?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
These are the 3-man crews in addition to what we have are advertised for now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Good question. Thank you. One of the other things that we're finding is a lot of the little simple duties that we used to do, whether it's deliver a trash can or a trash can lid is broken, it needs to be replaced, or someone calls in for a street light, but they forgot to get the pole number, we would send a crew on the way going to another task to swing by and take care of that. But unfortunately, that's risen so greatly now that we're having, whether it's trash cans or just repairing those, 60 plus of those a month. That's taken away from our staff, and it's not an efficient use of our time. So what we want to do is pilot a program that would start in January of next year, if you grant the funds, to hire a part-time person to come in and handle those staff, to run those documents up to the attorney's office that would need to get executed, go to the post office and drop off other things, measure fuel levels, pick up parts for our fleet mechanic at the auto parts store that can't be delivered now so he can concentrate on stuff. Go get that pole light number that someone did not have for us, or investigate. A lot of times people call in and say something don't look right. That's about all they can tell us. So we get an address and a location, and we go there and can say, okay, that is something we need to do. That is something City of Raleigh does. So we're looking to transfer that away from our crews, let them concentrate on primary tasks, and have someone else help with those less skilled tasks. So we'd like to pilot a program, see if that's sufficient, and if that pilot is successful, hopefully ultimately incorporate that as a full-time position or part-time position permanently in the Public Works Department. Like other departments, one of our biggest challenges right now is recruitment. We have very few applicants, and one of our, many times with the 2 opening positions that we have now, they don't meet our minimum requirements, or they want a larger amount of money than we can afford to pay or are even able to pay. We are very similar to our friends at the fire department. Our entry-level requirements are much higher than other employers, and our starting pay is lower. The requirements for public works are higher because of the combination of the work we do. Unlike fire and police, which are mostly competing with towns and cities for workers, public works is competing with everyone who can use the same skill set or any part of it. We have to compete with local landscapers. We have to compete with trade contractors. We have to compete with water and sewer contractors, electrical utility contractors, and general contractors. We recently lost a guy to a utility contractor and another one to a general contractor, both for significantly more pay. Occasionally I lose one to the fire department or the police department, but that's rare. And we don't feel like that's a loss because it transfers the knowledge they gain in public works into their police department and fire department activities. Some of our requirements apply to each of the competitors that we talked about that we compete against, but few would require us to do them all. The OSHA regulations that we deal with on a daily basis apply to the trades and the construction industry, but then they also apply to the complex equipment that we use, but they all don't have need to do the wide variety of skills that our public works staff do. For example, landscapers and most trades don't have on-call duties, and almost no one but NCDOT is showing up in the middle of the night to plow your streets. The variety of tasks we do is positive and negative. Most time when I talk to young guys that I'm trying to recruit, I sell it as a positive, that you're doing a variety of duties, that one day you could be rebuilding a catch basin, the next day you could be working on a roadway project with a complex work zone, or the next day you could be, especially in North Carolina weather, you could be brining and plowing. That's positive. People don't want to get bored. It keeps that routine up, and so they're not always doing the same thing. But that's negative when you need a wider set of skills. Public works attracts people who do not want to do the same thing every day, but it deters applicants who just want to be a truck driver or just mow. PW staff has to do it all. They have to be on call. We work weather events. We provide emergency response to fire and police, from a tractor trailer on fire with a hay or cotton bale, to a fuel spill on 64 or Arundel Avenue, to a log truck turned over on 96. And then the occasional donut truck, the rear door pops open and dumps donuts out on the road. We had to get up. And would you know, there was not even a policeman to be found.
There's your joke.
But on a serious note, the police were there early, and they got called away for a shots fire call. So I'm not going to blame them, but it is funny that Public Works was picking up donuts and not the police. So it tells everybody's paying attention. That's good. Clearly, these events happen at the most inopportune times. It's Saturday night when you're having dinner with family. It's quitting time on Friday, or it's Christmas Eve. So it makes it difficult to find people that are willing to come out in those times and respond and be away from their families. On the recruitment side, we're struggling. Our pay is low. Our starting pay for equipment operator is $30,077. When you look at the other people in the area, this map is very similar to what you saw with police and fire. It doesn't include the private construction firms. But just to give you an example, if you went to work for Wendell, Clayton, or Smithfield, you're getting paid 7% higher than Zebulon. If you're on the other end of the pay scale, if you go to Raleigh or Fuquay, you're getting 27% pay higher than the town of Zebulon is offering. And if you go to Rocky Mount, you're getting a third full more than our entry-level operators are. And just for reference, Wake Forest is 27% higher. Clearly, this makes it more difficult for us to attract the quality people that we need to provide the services that the Zebulon citizens have come to get used to. And since 2018, we've had 10 departures in our department. 5 have left us for higher pay, 4 have retired, and one's a career change. The one career change is Jordan Perry, who left the Public Works Department to pursue a career in the police department. So that's a positive thing. That's a good thing. The money we invested in Jordan carries over into his day-to-day duties in the police department, and we're excited about the work that he does over there to be one of Zebulon's finest. The recent retirees took away a significant amount of institutional knowledge, and it's tough to backfill, especially when this knowledge is not being transferred to our new younger employees who are leaving within 1 to 3 years. It's great when you need a stormwater line to be clean and you know you can trust the guy doing it because you trained him. But I'd rather have him back working for me every day instead of working for a local contractor. I fully recognize that money is not the only motivation for our employees to work for the town of Zebulon. Working for the town of Zebulon takes to be a very unique and special person, but at the end of the day, 75% of my team is working second jobs to make a livable wage, whether they're cutting lawns, delivering food, providing janitorial services, selling Christmas trees, or doing other odd jobs and working at nights. They have to do that to make a livable wage to provide for their families. So it's difficult when during a normal 7 to 4 job working day that they have to deal with 250 degrees of hot asphalt in July, or trimming trees on the highway median where there's cars running 90 plus miles an hour, which we call bullets. And then expect them to show up at nights and weekend and when we're hit by hard weather. So when they actually struggle to make a livable wage. One of the other goals and challenges that we've had in the Public Works Department is succession planning. There are gaps in the responsibility and knowledge between positions and the levels in the department. As part of this year's budget, you'll see a request for an assistant director engineer to address the help with the succession planning, but the more needing needs and all the levels we can develop today to help develop our employees today into the managers of tomorrow. The assistant director position is needed to help with this development review, as we talked about with all the active developments that are ongoing. As Zebulon continues to grow, we'll need an environmental technician to help manage the stormwater program. This person will monitor and report on conditions and run the public education events that are required of our permit. They will be a critical piece in protecting that infrastructure for the town of Zebulon. As we continue to grow, we're also going to need more a facility technician. Right now, we're covering building maintenance and stuff with our construction inspectors. They're split. Probably 75% of their time at this time is doing construction inspection, and the other 25% is performing building maintenance and stuff. Eventually, there's going to be too much development that they cannot concentrate and keep up with the aging buildings. One of the things that many people recognize when we talk about facilities, they recognize Curley Town Hall, they recognize the police station, public works facilities, but there's many other facilities that go unforeseen, like the maintenance building behind the community park or community center, the lift station, the ball field lights, fire pumps, generators, all critical infrastructure to help keep our facilities running. The introduction of a facilities tech will help allow our construction team to focus on construction inspecting, and the facilities tech can cover these duties. Additional positions would also give our staff opportunities to grow their skills and advance within public works. As the town grows, the more value a tenured staff will grow immensely. These are the people who just don't know how to run the knuckle boom or repair your stormwater line. They know Zebulon. They know where the cutoff valve is to prevent the flooding of a building without having to look at a map. Also, not go find the map. They know where it is. They instinctively go to it because they've been here. They also, the person in the stormwater line, they know the stormwater system, so that during a reclaimed water spill or a fuel leak, they're able to know that the stormwater system go down streams and put a plug in it before the fuel can contaminate the creek. These are new opportunities will keep them in Zebulon and motivate them to learn more, try harder, and do better. And Zebulon will be better off for it. To adjust the solution is to adjust to the market. We're already investing in our staff every day. We need to do more to protect that investment. We're spending money in turnover, recruiting, uniforms, training, plus the little mistakes that we all go through as we learn a new job. The money will be better spent on keeping and attracting quality new employees. Your people, whether it's the firemen, the police, your public works, or your other administrative staff, are your most important asset. They're more important than your roads, your stormwater system, your vehicles, and your buildings, or your parks. They're the ones that maintain and keep those up. I encourage you to protect them and invest in your people. This carries over into the hiring. And a recent example, I was talking to a couple of my managers about an upcoming operator that was getting ready to get off probation in March. We were talking about some of his strengths and weaknesses and things about how we could further his education to overcome some of those, a few weaknesses we had noticed. But 2 hours later, I got a notice that he was leaving me. So all that investment we had made in uniforms and training and stuff were gone. Before the employee got off probation, he'd already accepted a significantly higher paying job with a general contractor, less than 6 months. I know. We need to invest in our people, continue to pay them to be trained and be staffed to do a variety of tasks and stuff. As part of this year's budget, we are asking for $75,000 in adjustment of salaries to make us more competitive and encourage people to stay longer. Another difficulty that we're having is we need to enhance our technical expertise. We're also feeling at the management level the growing pains. Public Works has been without an assistant director since the utility merger in 2006. For years, we could manage the workload, but that was before the explosion of 12 major subdivisions. And each of them have multiple phases. Each review that we do does through multiple times. It's not uncommon to have as many reviews from 3 to 5. We need the investment into a assistant director engineer that would help with our succession planning and our development review. It will help us avoid premature structure failures because we didn't have enough time to review the plans. It helps us with maintenance issues and keeping the costs lower for the town as far as their infrastructure. We need to add the technical expertise to our staff. I feel like I'm pretty good with technical issues. I even stayed at a Holiday Inn last night, but greater expertise is needed to grow our system and understand the growing community and stuff. We're having more and more capital projects. Today we're investing in roadway widenings, traffic signals, and other major stormwater-related projects that you're aware of. Assistant Director will give us the capacity to manage those projects and protect your investment. With the additional management staff, we'll have the capacity for more training, classes, and educational conferences. The investment into an Assistant Director, town engineer, would cost approximately $125,000 with benefits. One of the greatest things that's going to help us maintain longevity of our employees in addition to the salary adjustments, is the development of a career ladder. Right now, operators feel like they have to have someone get promoted, leave, retire, before they can be promoted. We want to do like what you've seen in the fire department and the police department, introduce more levels for our operators to do. So here's a chart where we are projecting to give additional opportunities for advancement through additional training and hours and years of service. A couple of examples of those are the equipment operator 3, the environmental tech we talked about, a senior crew leader, capital project managers, ultimately as in our long-range plans for needs for public works. Give you a cost summary of what we were just asked for. We asked for in this year's budget that you'll see as we move forward is the 3 new positions that we talked about, the equipment operator 1, 2, and the crew leader. We also asked for assistant director, town engineer, and then the 4th, that part-time position. Those totals equal $310,000. Market adjustments to bring everybody in compliance with surrounding communities and the trades market, $75,000. And to implement the career ladder is $35,000, bringing a total of $420,000. I know this is a lot. We've asked for some of these positions over the year, but we've been able to afford them. Now it's becoming critical. It's our top priority above everything else at Public Works. We've got to invest in people. I can't emphasize this enough. Personnel is our greatest daily challenge to meet the long-term needs and the service levels that our residents and citizens expect. Here's a little bit of what we look like in 18,000 people over the next 5 years. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going into detail. It's pretty there laid out for you. But we are looking for, over the next 6 years, to go from staff of 14 to a staff of 28. And thank you for all that you've done for Public Works. We really appreciate it. I'm available for your questions.
So for FY23, just for the staffing and the capital improvements, you're seeking $883,000?
Yes and no. Yes, that is a correct total, but the $350,000 is already in this year's budget. We're requesting you to release it.
Okay, and so for over the next 7 years, just in capital funds, and I realize that the $350,000 will be included in that, you're asking for over $3 million?
Yes, ma'am.
And that doesn't include staffing or salary adjustments?
That is correct, ma'am. Our facility is showing its age. Our facility is in excess of 35 years old. It needs renovations. Our existing office building needs expansion. Our existing maintenance shop needs renovation, and then the expansion to include the new storage facility. And then ultimately, the maintenance yard needs to be expanded to give additional lay-down yards. There's been very little investment at the Public Works facility from a facility standpoint since the early 90s. We've done some little things over the years to putting a lift in the shop, maybe some LED lighting or radiant heat, but as far as the major renovations, they're just not occurred, and it's time.
I know, but in the next 7 years, there's significant renovations.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's time.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions?
Does your staff currently get pay differentials for nights, weekends, and emergencies?
Yes, ma'am. It's part of the personnel policy. Yes, ma'am. They
Okay.
get paid also for being on call.
So I understand part of the issue with staffing. How are you approaching getting these positions out into the public?
We're working closely with HR. We've tried a couple of things that we haven't done in the past as far as reaching out to our community colleges and maybe finding someone that's in the trade field that's interested. We put some stuff out on Facebook. We reached out. Lisa, you got a couple other ones that you've been using?
Yeah, we advertise on all social media platforms that we have. We advertise with Nash Community, Wake County, or Wake Community College as well. We have tried to reach out to some of the other municipalities to see what they have done, but they're all facing the same issues of not being able to find people to fill the positions.
Thank you. What would it mean for our capabilities and for our bottom line if we were to decide to cut bulk waste as a service that we provide?
You would actually lose money. That is a very profitable piece of our revenue stream. Last time I done an analysis, and it's probably 5 years ago, I did it for the mayor. We were at the time making over $100,000 a year on bulky waste.
Was that through recycling of metals?
It's mainly through the fee that we charge each homeowner each year. We do recycle some metals. We do get a little revenue there. But when you looked at the revenue stream that we're charging per month to each household over 12 months, and then figuring in the cost and depreciation, equipment, man hours, fuel, and disposal, we were still having a positive revenue stream of over $100,000. I would project now it's much higher than that because of the number of households we've got.
Okay.
It's a very profitable piece for us, and eliminating that does free up time, but it also, I think it transfers your time to your code enforcement staff and planning that ultimately have to be addressing those issues.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions? And no further. Thank you again for your time, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good jokes. I still squirmed a little bit, though. So I again, as I did last month, I want to just give you a running summary. I hesitate to show you these because it's not going to be the full picture. As an example, when the departments submit budgets to me, they're going to include inflations on the services that they're already providing. This is just the summary of what was presented tonight. We are focusing on investment in positions, whether they're new positions or existing positions, because those are going to be the driving costs for you, and those will also be long-term costs for you. A clarification to make, the legal is not going to be, while the planning and the public works figures are additional if they are approved, the legal is actually $25,000 more. While Eric talked about the $275,000, currently you're budgeting $250,000 for those services. So just to offer that as a clarification. All right, just as a reminder, the budget is adopting a policy. It's not an annual right of balancing debits and credits. It's about how you prioritize the programs and the projects to achieve the goals that are within your strategic plan. As far as where you are on the schedule, and I probably should have shown another bullet to show more progress, because you have now completed 2 community assessment presentations. You completed one February 17th, as well as tonight. You'll have your next one at your April work session on the 21st. And then the budget will be delivered to you May 2nd, and then you'll kick off a series of work sessions for you to, as a group, determine how those programs and policies and projects will be prioritized. And then per state statute, you'll have to take that budget to the public and have a public hearing on it on the 6th. On the night of the 6th, having completed all the state statutory requirements, you can adopt the budget ordinance as long as you don't adopt it any later than July 1st. And with that, I'll recognize Michael Clark to talk about utility allocation policy. Let me give an intro first. So this presentation is a follow-up to February's work session. The board will receive detailed information on the point system to incentivize land development proposals that include, as examples, public infrastructure improvements, conservations, such as preserving natural habitats, and amenities such as recreation facilities. The board may schedule the utility allocation policy for initial unveiling and the start of the formal discussion at the joint public hearing with the planning board on April 11th of 2022. And with that, I'll recognize Michael Clark. Where are you?
I think we're about to say good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board, as we continue this meeting tonight. As Joe mentioned, this is a continuation of our conversation that we had last month regarding utility allocation. To bring everybody up to speed, actually we'll get to that in a moment. Tonight we're going to consider moving forward with a draft of the utility allocation policy, which the policy, the application associated policy, as well as the proposed text amendments were all passed out to you just a moment ago by the town clerk. And ultimately tonight we're going to be talking about the methodology of requiring these improvements above the UDO requirements to allow the connection into the municipal water and sewer system. As you're aware, while the city of Raleigh owns the utility system, we own the allocation. The amount of water that's available, the amount of sewer that they're willing to process, that is owned by the town. Much like what other communities have done, particularly within East Wake County, we're proposing this as a mechanism or a tool to work with the development community. To bring you up to speed, as well as for our new commissioner, the utility allocation policy is a base and bonus points system. Each use is designated a particular base point category. From there, they need to make up to 50 points based on, or with bonus points. Those categories are removing nonconformities from the property, as well as public infrastructure improvements, green development standards, as well as site design, outdoor enhancements, and transit improvements. And finally, amenities, and these would be specific for residential developments, or developments that have residential components. So a mixed-use development, as an example, apartment complex that has retail on the first floor, they would still be able to tap into these resources to make up those bonus points. Finally, a total of 50 bonus points is needed. One thing you'll notice is there is not one use that automatically hits those 50 bonus points. Part of the expectation is raising the bar a bit on the development, but still providing incentives for for uses that we're trying to attract. To start out, base points, which is the foundation of this policy, ranges from 15 to 45 points. Developments such as this, where it's your standard cookie cutter residential subdivision full of single family dwelling units, they would only be able to receive 15 bonus points, or 15 base points. So they'd be responsible for making up the other 45 points. However, other uses would start higher based on the characteristics and the need for them to be in the community. To determine these points, we started out with what are the best practices? What are other municipalities doing? What are things that are kind of nationwide trends? Right now, we're in a development surge where residential development is going to happen here regardless of what regulatory standards we have in place. That's why they start at 15. Mixed-use developments, that's a little harder to come by. That's why that one starts out at 45 points. So it really makes a difference based on what type of development it is. From the best practices, we adapted it to what are the needs specifically for the town of Zebulon. We looked at our comprehensive land use plan, what some of the details and the comments that we received during the public engagement portions of that plan. One thing that, as an example, we heard a lot of is we need a hotel. So while the other communities have a much lower base point standard for a hotel, we raised that up. I believe that they're only required to receive 8 bonus points to be able to meet that 50-point standard. We also corresponded to the land use patterns. Where are we growing, where are we not? You'll see in the policy, we've shifted pretty dramatically over the past couple of years in terms of the tax base, where it was a very low portion of our tax base was from residential, and that's progressed over time and is going to continue to progress based on the existing developments that have been approved. Finally, we make sure that's reflective of the market. One of the trends that we're seeing now is young professionals as well as empty nesters are looking for more of an urban style environment to live in. They want to be able to live in an apartment above a retail establishment. They want close-knit, walkable communities. So things such as the revitalization of downtown is a market condition that we want to really encourage the redevelopment on. So we're making sure that redevelopment of those areas receive higher base points. The bonus points is how you make up to the additional 50. As I noted, the 4 categories are nonconformity abatements and public infrastructure improvements. To start out with the nonconformities in abatement, think of as an example of this picture. We've all seen situations where the development patterns from the 1960s and the 1970s are no longer representative of how we live today. One of the things that we see frequently is what's known as sign pollution. And part of that is in our Unified Development Ordinance, we no longer allow for pole signs. So things such as the East Triangle Shopping Center, if they wanted to redevelop that site, they would get points for turning that pole sign into a monument sign. It's a small thing that they could do, but we'll reward them for removing those nonconformities. Roadway infrastructure is the next component, and they can get 10 points maximum for that. Now, this has above and beyond what would be required based on the TIA and other UDO requirements. As an example, let's say it called for a 4-way stop, well, instead of, or even a 2-way stop. Well, instead of that, perhaps a traffic circle. Additionally, if it's an off-site improvement that's not otherwise required by either the TIA or something or another mechanism, upgrading those intersections not only beautifies the particular neighborhood, creates an aesthetic appeal to it, but also reduces the speeds of traffic and improves pedestrian safety. So let's have a situation where we can recognize that and award points for that. The third for this category is off-site greenway improvements. As you're aware, we want to be a very walkable community. having this greenway network is an alternative modes of transportation in and of itself. It creates incentives for folks to get out of their cars and seek either bicycle or other modes of transportation. Well, we have these segments in between these neighborhoods that could be filled in. This provides incentives for that development community. Not only does it help with the saleability and the marketability of those particular developments if it's part of a greenway network, it also helps the adjacent developments as well. The next bonus point category is green development standards and building standards. First is maximum 10 points for conservation of natural habitat. Think about the areas of town where we have those natural pine stands, where those trees have been there for 60, 70 years, where you have that dense vegetated environment. The preservation of those type of areas would be able to receive points. Another is parking lots and stormwaters. And for the non-engineer technical folks, this is a bioswale inside of a parking lot. Right now, the way most parking lots are designed is it actually allows for the grease and grime and other debris to fall off of vehicles and get washed into the stormwater system. Well, that stormwater system eventually ends up in the rivers and creeks and lakes and other tributaries throughout the state. Having situations like this where you have select plantings that the water runs into helps to purify and clean that water before it's distributed into those tributaries, creeks, and streams. Final part of this category is 20 points for building design requirements. Right now, the town cannot require architectural design requirements at the time of site plan. We have mechanisms to do it elsewhere, but this creates an opportunity for us to work collaboratively with the builders. We have homes right now that are, unfortunately, the majority of the home is, or the front of the house is a garage door. That is not a pedestrian-friendly environment. That is not a welcoming environment. Having architectural standards that really focus on high architectural detail, such as front porches, columns on the porches, shutters, architectural details, pediments, corbels, having the garage located on the side or the back of the structure where it's not otherwise required. Those elements are things that we could reward developers as we work with them. The next two categories I split into two parts just for clarification. It's a little easier if we do that way. The outdoor enhancements would have a maximum of 10 points. And for this, think of really walkable environments. You want places where you have a destination to walk to, as opposed to just walking along a path, a goal. This is an entry feature in one of the developments on 64 in Apex. They designed this entry feature to be kind of a welcome sign for the rest of the community. When you walk, or when you drive into this community, it creates a sense of arrival, and it creates an automatic benchmark of this is going to be a high quality design, really walkable community. While it does have a small sign on there, which is not quite legible here, that says Sweetwater, the structure itself really tells the story. But it doesn't necessarily need to be this. It could be something like this, where it's a public park built immediately adjacent to a development. It could be a residential, it could be commercial development. But having opportunities where you have a focus point to go to that really focuses on pedestrian and community interaction is what we're looking for these outdoor enhancements. Transit improvements is the other side of this bonus point category. They can get up to 8 points, and it could be anything from this, which is a bus shelter. We would hope not to have just your bench out in the middle of the elements type bus shelter, but something where it makes sense that there's going to be a future bus connection. Because at some point, such as what the other communities in Wake County are doing, we're going to need to look at mass transit services. Apex, Cary, they're already there with circulator systems. We have a pilot program starting in a couple of weeks that's going to be a vehicle-based, but it's going to get people start thinking about this in the future of, okay, how am I going to get around town if I don't have a vehicle? Making sure that we plan ahead with resources like this will put us ahead of the game. but it doesn't necessarily need to be a parking or a bus stop. We do have a lot of commuters that come from Rocky Mount, from Wilson, and they're heading into downtown Raleigh. Having a park and ride opportunity, especially as they come into Wake County, where they're able to leave their car there and meet up with others and carpool, one will reduce the traffic congestion on some of the freeways and create additional opportunities for nearby commercial, such as gas stations and convenience stores. But this would also be available for 8 points. The last of the bonus point category is amenities, and like I said, these are specific to the residential projects. It would be private greenways, and the way this would be structured is it's a maximum of 3 points, but all of these are based on the degree and intensity of improvement. As an example, I believe we have it's a 1 point for the first 1,000 linear feet, 2 points for for up to 2,000 linear feet, and 3 points for over 3,000 linear feet. That structure creates the incentive for them to go beyond just the regular greenway system. On top of that, these greenways would be fully maintained and operated by the HOA because they'd be fully private. It does also create some leniencies in terms of the structural improvements. As an example, this one in another community is a mulch greenway as opposed to a paved surface. Pools are definitely an attractive feature here in North Carolina in the summer. We hear from the existing neighborhoods that do have pools that unfortunately their pools are too small for the number of homes that they have. Being able to provide points for pools. Along with pools go outdoor decks and patios, having 3 points available for them based on size and amenities that are included on those. Pool amenities, slides, diving boards, or other features, lap lanes, could all receive points. Clubhouses is another one. And you think of how clubhouses are becoming calling cards for some of these communities, such as Wendell Falls. When somebody says Wendell Falls, well, now we might think Publix, but for a long time, they thought of the farmhouse out in front of Wendell Falls because that became their calling card. Well, let's reward them if they're going to have a clubhouse that has high design. The final one is additional active recreation amenities. And this is going beyond just your private playground equipment. One of the things that we're now seeing with a lot of interest is active resources for adults. You have these outdoor fitness centers, essentially, that allow for adults to get out and become more active. As the population of Zebulon continues to diversify, we need to make sure that we're taking care of everybody within our population, and additional active recreation facilities is definitely a way to do that. To summarize everything that I just said, every development, if this was approved, would have to achieve 50 total points. That could be made up of your structure base points, which would be 15 to 45, but they would need to make up the additional 5 to 35 points. These would be in addition to what the UDO or the TI or other documents would require. And the policy and points could be amended periodically. You'll notice that in the handout, there's actual text amendment. That's the only part in terms of the UDO that would have to be amended, but it references back to the policy, which allows for greater flexibility for the board to change it as the dynamics and the needs change. So moving forward, as noted, staff recommends obtaining public input at a joint public hearing. This brings out into the public light and allows the citizens to voice their input. Additionally, allows for the planning board to make a recommendation on the draft. Alternatively, we could revisit the point structure. If there's things that you see that are grossly out of character for what the needs are of Zebulon, we could look at that. And another alternative is we could explore other avenues beyond utility allocation policies if you so desire. And with that, I'm available if you have any questions.
You've given us a really good overview of the point system, but I would really like to see the entire rubric.
It's in your packet.
This one that we just got? Okay, all right. Thank you.
Currently, how many communities in Wake County follow a utility allocation point system?
There are 4 other communities within Wake County that follow this system, 3 of which are also merger communities with City of Raleigh. And that does include both Wendell and Knightdale as well.
What are the other options to be used instead? Well, I guess not other than, but maybe in tangent with the utility allocation policy.
The other primary option is to amend the Unified Development Ordinance to raise the bar on each of these categories. The complexity with that, it doesn't create the flexibility that developers are really looking for, or that the staff is looking for to work and be able to negotiate these elements with the development community to achieve very high quality developments that fit the character of Zebulon.
More questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, Board of Adjustment.
Mike, you could have just stayed up here. Yeah, okay. Zebulon's Board of Adjustment has 2 major responsibilities. They hear appeals from decisions of the zoning enforcement official, and they grant variances to the zoning ordinance. The Board of Commissioners, per general statutes, may delegate these responsibilities differently. The board is about to receive an overview of the process Zebulon currently follows and alternatives for future consideration. With that, I'll recognize Michael Clark.
As Joe noted, the next topic is the Board of Adjustment and the potential options moving forward. For consideration tonight, we'll have a discussion regarding the future of the Board of Adjustment as its own independent board. North Carolina General Statute 160D is the regulatory statute that allows for us to have a Board of Adjustment, sets the parameters as well as how they are structured. It notes that it must have both in-town and ETJ representation. This is one of the boards, much like the planning board, make sure it takes into consideration the full understanding of citizens' needs, whether they're within the corporate limits or they're within the ETJ. I'm not sure, does the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee also have ETJ representation?
It's not required, but we do.
Okay. Yeah, so the 3 appointed boards have that option. It is a quasi-judicial board, which operates similar to a court-type system, almost like a grand jury. It is evidence-based, which means that a person who comes in can't say, I feel, I believe, or make statements like that unless they have quantitative or qualitative documentation to back that up. So a citizen wouldn't be able to come in and just say, I believe there's too much traffic. Well, what are the traffic counts? It also requires that there be no ex parte communication. So as these cases are coming about, applicants are not allowed to communicate with the Board of Adjustment members. All of the document, evidence, testimony, that all has to be discussed during an open meeting format. They hear appeals. As Joe noted, if the planning department or the zoning officials makes a decision, they're able to appeal that decision, whether it is our determination that something doesn't meet an applicable UDO regulation, or there's a notice of violation that's sent. This is the avenue for them to appeal those particular decisions. The other item that they deal with is variance. If there's situations where they want to do something, but they realize that there's restrictions on the land or the characteristics that prevent them from being able to do what they want to do. The easiest example of this is they want to construct a house on a single-family lot, but there's a large rock outcropping that's going to be cost prohibitive for them to be able to position the house in an area within the building or within the building envelope and not encroach in the setbacks. They could then request a variance, a dimensional variance in that standard, to allow for that structure to encroach into the setback to avoid having to remove the rock outcropping. One thing that I have note is applicants cannot request use variances within the state of North Carolina anymore. At one point, use variances were something that boards could hear, but actually before 160D was even put in place, that availability went away. They are a decision-making board. They, unlike the planning board, essentially have the final say on items. Their decision is appealable to court, but if they grant a variance or an appeal, they are the only ones that have to take that into consideration. It's similar to your role with special use permits. There's no joint public hearing required, only a quasi-judicial hearing before this board for special use permits. The options available tonight based on 160D is to possibly take into consideration keeping them as a standalone organization, or 160D does allow those duties and roles to be designated to either the planning board or the governing board. Some of the challenges that we currently have is participation in quorum. And partly this relates to how infrequent they meet. One of the options to address this is to transfer that role to the planning board or the board of commissioners. As I noted, there is very infrequent meetings. In fact, there's only been 7 appeals in the past 20 years. There's only been 5 variance requests since 2011. That is a board that meets very infrequently. One alternative, if this were to stay as a standalone board, would be to hold monthly meetings or every other month. However, there are staff resources and costs associated with that. Because they also meet so infrequently, they require a substantial amount of training, and unfortunately, that training doesn't always happen. An option to address that is additional funding and staff resources being allocated towards making sure that board has the training needed to stay up to date on regulations, procedures, and statutory changes. So the options are to retain a separate board of adjustment as an independent board. As I noted, with this, there's additional challenges that would have to be taken into consideration, such as additional training and staff time and resources to make sure that board operates in accordance with applicable statutes and ordinances. Transfer the powers to the planning board. That board meets a lot more frequently, up to 12 times a year, depending upon the requests. It also has already ETJ representation. So that component in the state statute that requires that ETJ representation is already addressed based on the makeup of the planning board. The other option is to transfer those powers to the Board of Commissioners. You already have quasi-judicial powers for special use permits. However, you do not have ETJ representation on the Board of Commissioners. So that would have to be something that would have to be addressed. And I am available if you have any questions or comments.
I think for me, I've spoken to some of the members of the Board of Adjustment, and they're looking to be very active, what they explained to me. They look to be very active. It's just that they haven't had that opportunity, as you stated. And they're trying to figure out how they can up the meeting opportunities for them and the training as well. Like I said, I personally have spoken to two of those members, and they're looking to be very active. So I'm kind of hesitant to say just kind of do away with it, because they're citizens that really want to be active in the community. So I'm trying to figure out how we can get them up to par a little bit more.
Well, one of the options available is if the Board of Adjustment powers were transferred to the board, we just received word this morning that we now have 3 in-town positions available on the planning board.
Okay.
So that's an option for those individuals to stay involved, just move from one board to another.
Okay. Thank you.
And ultimately, tonight, we're looking for direction from you on which way that you would recommend proceeding.
Can you research 160D and see what the option is for ETJ reps on the Board of Commissioners, how we would meet that requirement?
That would actually be in 160A, I believe, which dedicates the elected officials' makeup. It would have to be an appointed position, but they would not be a member of the Board of Commissioners, and they would have to come in only for those variance requests or those appeals, which then gets back into that same circumstance of those individuals would be meeting so infrequently.
So we'd still need a member and an alternate from the ETJ.
That is correct. Yes, we have one ETJ member and one alternate, that's correct.
So if we continue and how much would resources are we talking about if we continue to have it more frequently and have more training with the ones that are already involved?
Well, the training for the ones that would already be involved, it'd be an independent, dedicated training. Those resources would be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 to bring in a consultant. Staff could do that periodically, but once again, it goes back down to staff resources. We, in the planning department, are down one staff person at the moment, and there is an incredible demand for planners across the country to the point where we're advertising a planning board position pretty much almost every state, trying to get qualified applicants. We unfortunately do not have the current staff capability to do that. The other component is staffing those meetings. It is only one meeting a month at maximum, but the prep work that goes into Board of Commissioner cases is very substantial. We're looking through full past history of the sites, going into code enforcement records, researching not only statute, but other cases involved. There's additional legal fees that are associated with those projects as well. The ability to have those wrapped up into corresponding to another existing board really simplifies the process, because you have an individual already putting together documents and papers work for that particular item.
Is there not training available through NCLM or the UNCSOG? Would we have to necessarily hire a consultant?
Yes, there is. We've looked into that in the past, and we can again.
Do you know what the cost breakdown is?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
The last time we brought someone in, it was over $500
For
an
as a
hour.
Consultant or for?
From the School of Government.
Okay.
So, and I want to say it was like $500 for like 1 hour of training, and then it was also transportation, but that's probably been, it was before Mike was here, so it was probably 7 years ago. I think it was before Joe was here. So it's probably been 7 years ago.
I just recently spoke to somebody at the School of Government too, and what they said, sometime on their first time out, they don't charge. I mean, each department is different, of course, but she stated that initial to come out kind of to entice us to use them more, it's kind of like give that seed educational point. So I did just recently speak to the School of Government with that as well.
Yeah.
So that might be something we want to look at too as well.
I don't know if they would count when they've come in before as already being one, but I mean, that's something Mike can investigate for sure.
No, definitely, if they're willing to come out free of charge, we'll definitely use it.
She did state that some of the departments are doing that, and I just recently spoke to her about some training coming out to for us as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
I personally feel like I'd like to have the additional information about either NCLM or SOG training before I make a decision about the future of the Board of Adjustments. I don't know if you guys feel the same way.
feel the same way.
But I think that getting a little bit more information is prudent.
Okay.
I like that as well, just a little bit more training, give them an option before we just totally dismantle it.
That the direction
Yes.
the majority of the board? I'm looking at heads, so,
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Okay, almost there. Last presentation for the night. Bond referendums are just one method to authorize the financing of capital projects. So certificates of participation are another way. Simply raising taxes and dedicating those revenues to the projects are another way. So capital projects include projects such as fire station, parks, and roads. This presentation follows up on questions that were raised by the board at their February work session and provides examples of actions the board must approve by their regular meeting on May 2nd, 2022, if there is an interest among the board in placing a bond referendum on the ballot for November 8th, 2022, which is Election Day. And with that, I'll recognize Bobby Fitz.
All right, thank you, Joe. As Joe mentioned, we could talk about this at last month's work session already, but just kind of a review, we're kind of getting close to drop dead time on do we want to do something to get on this ballot in November or not. So what I gave you during the break, the first 3-pager that's stapled, what that is a sample or example of a preliminary findings resolution. This resolution will need to be done and approved no later than the May 2nd meeting. It's basically just declaring that we have the intent to get on the bond referendum for November. The second thing that I gave you was this 1 page. It's basically a budget amendment that would be required to appropriate funds to start the process financially for the bond council that we went over last time. The cost of that's about $36,000. The financial advisor could be up to $80,000 depending on which method we go with, a private sale or in the bond market. And then the public engagement and education piece could be up to possibly $50,000. So that would also come to you at the May 2nd meeting if you so choose to go that route to try to get on the November ballot. Any other questions regarding the bond referendum and the possibility of getting on the ballot in November?
Do we have the breakdown of what each department would be asking for and what the total bond would be?
Not yet. It would kind of just depend, that would just depend on the board's priorities based on parks, how much do we want to do in parks.
Oh, no, I understand that, but we don't even have an idea of what everyone is asking for.
What we could do, you could do a maximum amount, let's say $4 million for parks. You could authorize $4 million. That doesn't mean you have to do $4 million. For instance, you could do 2, or same thing with a fire station. If we think it's going to be 5 now, and it comes in a little less, we don't have to issue the maximum. But if we need to be a little conservative on what we think we might do. If we think it's going to be $5 million for a fire station, we might want to do 6, for instance. That doesn't mean we have to issue 6, but we could. We're authorized to. So that's why I say it's kind of based on board's priority as far as parks projects, for instance.
And regardless of if the bond passes or fails, it's going to be $166,000 out of our budget.
No, that would be, let's say it doesn't pass, then some of those, the issuance costs, like phase 2 for bond counsel and the financial advisor wouldn't necessarily apply.
Okay.
So let's say, for instance, bond counsel phase 2, if it was to pass, is about 27,000. So let's say it doesn't pass, bond council portion would only be about 8,000. For the financial advisor, let's say it doesn't pass, we'd be not to exceed 10,000. So all the issuance costs associated with the actual issuance for the financial advisor would not be 80, it'd be 10, for instance.
If it didn't pass, it would be 10?
Right.
Okay.
These are kind of maximum amounts, we'll say, assume it does pass.
At this point, do you need any guidance of whether we want to try to do it this year or next year?
You know, I think staff's done a good job telling us we have about a 6-month lead time from when we do a resolution and get on the ballot. So there's really 2 big important decisions to make. Do we do this on election cycle, as in November, or do we do off cycle? And then number 2, I have a wish list, but I don't have any prices. And I'm sure everybody else here has a wish list without prices. So possibly at our retreat, we could sit down and compare some wish lists and get some idea if we're talking 2 million or 6 million, or don't want to proceed.
I think we're cutting it mighty close, because you said this ordinance had to be done by May.
Yeah, this is when we
In
kind
order
of,
to go into this November.
right, yeah.
So to me, it seems like we all ought to sit down and have just a session on a bond referendum so that we can pull ourselves together. Not to take, anything from our retreat or anything, but just specifically for that, and maybe have it on the next November's bond. Put it on that election. I just think.
How much is it to put it on an off cycle?
The cost for this year would be about $2,400 if we want to get on there. If it's on November of 23, it wouldn't be any additional, because that would be a normal election year.
Okay.
So it would be about 11 or 12,000 roughly is what this past November was, because that was a normal one. If we were to do a special one for this November, it would be about 2,400. If it's 23, that would just be 11 or 12-ish, around there.
Okay. Thank you.
So is that the direction? We want to discuss it more at another meeting? I like that.
So not this May, don't bring anything yet this May we'll try to wait?
I would say wait. I don't know what the others think, but I think we're moving a little too fast there.
I'm personally on board with waiting. It seems a little bit rushed to me, like we're kind of just trying to make it happen. That's my personal opinion, but it's like we kind of rush it. So I'm
Work session on just bond, and the wish list will be in order.
Yeah.
okay.
At the retreat?
No, not it. I don't think we need to do it at the retreat, because there's too many other things to cover. I think we need to have a separate
do we have an agenda yet?
session.
For the retreat?
Excuse me, didn't hear you.
What?
Is there an agenda out for the retreat?
Strategic plan is the agenda.
No, okay, so there's just one item on the agenda right now?
Yeah, it's a full-day process with the facilitator.
Okay.
So something for the board to consider. If you don't get to it at your mini retreat in April, which I think is reasonable to expect that you won't get to it because there's a lot of ground to cover, you probably won't have a dedicated work session available to you before we need a decision, unless you schedule a special called meeting. I think you'll have a better idea after your April mini retreat, which is in the early part of April. You'll have that, I want to say it's the 4th week in April, that you could schedule some additional time, and that would still be before before this May deadline. So if you want additional time dedicated to the bond referendum, it would be that I'm guessing at timeframes, that fourth week in April is going to be your shot.
Yeah, I think that before we decide to move it to next year, it would be a good idea to maybe talk about it again before that May 2nd deadline, or if we have the opportunity to do that, like you said, just so that we all have a clear and better understanding of exactly if we're going to vote on it in May or if we're going to move it to next year. I think we need to have an opportunity to make that decision.
So let me offer this as a recommendation. At your April meeting, we'll put on the agenda a calendar adjustment for you to consider to schedule an additional meeting. And if you want to schedule it, then you can, but it'll give you a chance, if you want to schedule that meeting, to have further discussion specifically related to a bond referendum.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. Is that agreeable?
I still think it's pushing it, but, yeah, I mean, you know.
Okay.
I think it's pushing it too, but we should at least talk about it.
Right.
Any other discussion? Thank you, Bob.
No more slides. You made it.
Okay.
Mayor, that completes the staff's presentations for this work session.
Is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Meeting adjourned.